The coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but Jessica Monroe kept her hands wrapped around the ceramic mug anyway. It was one of those overpriced artisan pieces from the farmer's market, the kind with an uneven glaze that caught your fingernail when you traced the rim. The coffee inside had developed that filmy surface that only truly neglected coffee achieves. A rainbow sheen like oil on wet pavement. Through the wall, she could hear Mrs. Patterson's television, the muffled drone of a game show punctuated by canned laughter. The sound had a peculiar quality, slightly distorted by its journey through drywall and insulation, like hearing the world from underwater. Jessica focused on it, letting the rhythm of distant applause wash over her, because focusing on anything else meant acknowledging the stack of mail on her kitchen table. The apartment smelled like vanilla and dust. She'd bought those plug-in air fresheners during a midnight Amazon spiral, the kind that promised to transform your space into a Tuscan villa or mountain retreat. What she'd gotten instead was a synthetic sweetness that couldn't quite mask the underlying mustiness of a building constructed in 1972. The scent clung to everything: her clothes, her hair, even the pages of the books on her shelf. Outside, February rain drummed against the window with the persistence of someone who'd been kept waiting too long. Each drop traced a path down the glass, merging with others, splitting apart, merging again in an endless dance of combination and separation. Jessica watched one particular droplet make its way from the top corner of the window, gathering mass and momentum, until it finally surrendered to gravity and raced toward the sill. Her phone buzzed against the laminate countertop. The sound, part vibration, part rattle, sent a small jolt through her chest. She didn't look at it. She knew who it would be. Miranda didn't believe in giving people space to breathe, space to think. Miranda believed in persistence, in the relentless forward march of getting what she wanted. The mug was warm now from her hands, though the coffee inside remained cold. Jessica studied the sediment at the bottom, the way the grounds had settled into patterns like tea leaves, like something that might tell a fortune if you knew how to read it. If you knew. She set the mug down with a soft click. The sound seemed too loud in the quiet apartment, too final. Her fingers left wet prints on the ceramic, taking out ghostly impressions that faded as she watched. The mail stack had that particular thickness that meant nothing good. White envelopes, manila folders, the occasional glossy postcard advertising services she didn't need. But there, 3 pieces down, she could see the edge of something else. Cream-colored paper, expensive stock, the kind of envelope that held invitations to weddings or announcements of deaths, or timeshare presentations. Jessica stood, her chair scraping against the linoleum with a sound like a small animal in distress. The floor was cold against her bare feet. She'd kicked off her slippers somewhere between the couch and the kitchen, part of the slow dissolution of order that had characterized her morning. The coldness felt good, honest, real in a way the rest of the day hadn't been. She walked to the window instead of the table. The glass was cool against her forehead when she leaned into it, cool enough to make her skin tingle. Outside, the parking lot sprawled in its usual Monday morning emptiness. Most of the cars were gone, their owners off to jobs and lives and responsibilities. Only Mrs. Patterson's ancient Lincoln remained, parked at an angle that suggested failing eyesight or fading concern for the opinions of others. The rain had that February quality, not quite cold enough to be sleet, not warm enough to promise spring. Just water, falling because that's what water does. It pooled in the low spots of the asphalt, creating mirrors that reflected the gray sky above. Jessica watched a crow land in one of the puddles, its feathers sleek and black, so black they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The bird dipped its beak into the water, tilted its head back, repeated the motion with the mechanical precision of something following ancient programming. Her phone buzzed again. And again. 3 times in quick succession, which meant Miranda had moved past texting and into calling. The sound seemed to pierce through the vanilla air, through the sound of rain and distant television, demanding attention with the insistence of a child pulling at your sleeve. Jessica turned from the window. The phone screen glowed with Miranda's name, accompanied by a photo Jessica had taken 2 years ago at some forgettable birthday dinner. Miranda mid-laugh, wine glass raised, that particular joy that comes from being the center of attention. Looking at it now felt like examining an artifact from an archaeological dig. Aye, something precious and utterly foreign. She answered on the 4th ring. Finally! Miranda's voice came through sharp and bright, the audio equivalent of sunlight on chrome. I was starting to think you died. Just busy, Jessica said. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, rusty from disuse. She'd barely spoken since Friday evening. Busy. Miranda drew the word out, investing it with skepticism and amusement in equal measure. Doing what exactly? Last I checked, you had the day off. Through the phone, Jessica could hear the ambient sounds of Miranda's world, the hum of traffic, the beep of a crosswalk signal, the distant shout of someone hawking newspapers. Miranda was always in motion, always in the middle of something. She treated stillness like a personal failing. Just thinking, Jessica said. "'It's a dangerous pastime." Miranda laughed, that practiced laugh she'd perfected somewhere between college and her first promotion. "Listen, I'm around the corner. Thought I'd swing by, talk about this weekend. You still haven't given me an answer about the lake house." Jessica's hand tightened on the phone. The lake house. Of course, because Miranda couldn't just call to chat, couldn't just exist in someone's life without wanting something. "I'm not really—" "Don't say you're not dressed," Miranda cut in. "I've seen you in your pajamas 1,000 times. I'll bring coffee, the good stuff, not that grocery store swill you buy." The line went dead before Jessica could protest further. She stood holding the phone, feeling the weight of it in her hand, the faint warmth it generated against her palm. Through the window, the crow had been joined by 2 others. They hopped around the puddle in a kind of dance, occasionally spreading their wings in displays that seemed equal parts territorial and playful. 7 minutes. That's how long it would take Miranda to get from the intersection of Pine and 4th to Jessica's apartment complex. 7 minutes to decide what face to wear, what version of herself to present. 7 minutes to prepare for the conversation that was coming, that had always been coming, that had happened before and would happen again. Except this time, Jessica knew how it ended. The thought arrived fully formed, like something she'd known all along but had only now allowed herself to acknowledge. She pressed her fingertips against her temples, feeling the slight pulse of blood beneath skin. The faint ache that had been building since she'd woken up this morning, this Monday morning in February, with rain and cold coffee and a stack of mail she hadn't opened. This Monday morning she'd lived before. Jessica moved to the bathroom on autopilot, her feet knowing the path even as her mind spun. The bathroom mirror was spotted with toothpaste flecks and water stains, the evidence of a woman who cleaned in sporadic bursts rather than consistent maintenance. She looked at her reflection, really looked, for the first time since waking. 32 years old. The age stared back at her from the mirror, written in the faint lines around her eyes, the slight softness under her chin. Her hair needed washing. She could see that in the way it hung limp around her face, dark blonde going to brown at the roots. She was wearing the same oversized t-shirt she'd worn to bed, gray with a faded logo from a 5K she'd never actually run. The shirt had a small hole near the hem, something she kept meaning to throw away, but never did. She knew this moment, knew the exact placement of the soap dispenser on the sink, the way the shower curtain bunched at the right side because one of the rings had broken, knew that if she opened the medicine cabinet, she'd find the travel-sized shampoo bottle she'd stolen from a hotel in Cleveland, 3/4 full, cap crusted with dried product. The knowing was visceral, complete, like remembering a dream, except dreams faded and this only grew sharper. Her hands gripped the edge of the sink. The porcelain was cold, solid, real. In the mirror, her knuckles went white. She watched her reflection's chest rise and fall, counting breaths, trying to anchor herself to something concrete. She was 32 years old. It was Monday, February 14th. Valentine's Day, though she had no plans and no prospects. She worked as a technical writer for a medical supply company, a job that paid the bills and filled her days with the minutiae of product specifications and regulatory compliance. She lived alone in a 1-bedroom apartment in a complex that had seen better decades. She had $3,247 in her checking account, $12,891 in her 401k, and approximately $7,000 in credit card debt spread across 3 cards. And she had already lived this day before. No, that wasn't quite right. She had lived this day, and the days after it. Months of days. Years of them. She had lived them and made choices and suffered consequences, and now she was here at the beginning again, with the weight of all those unmade choices pressing against her skull like a migraine waiting to bloom. The sound of a car door slamming echoed from the parking lot below. Jessica's eyes snapped to the small window above the toilet, but she couldn't see the lot from this angle. Didn't matter. She knew it was Miranda's Audi, silver and immaculate, parked precisely within the lines because Miranda did everything precisely. She had maybe 3 minutes. Jessica splashed cold water on her face, the shock of it grounding. Water dripped from her chin back into the sink, forming patterns in the porcelain bowl. She grabbed the hand towel, blue, slightly scratchy, smelling faintly of mildew because she'd left it in the washer overnight last week, and pressed it against her face. The terry cloth absorbed water and the scent of cheap facial soap, leaving her skin feeling tight and clean. In the other room, her phone was ringing again. Not Miranda this time. The ringtone was different. The default tone she'd never bothered to change, which meant work. Probably Dave from Regulatory asking about the defibrillator manual she was supposed to have finished last week. She ignored it. The mirror showed a woman who looked more awake now, more present. Jessica studied herself, looking for signs of whatever had happened. Some mark or change or indication that she'd been ripped from one point in time and deposited back in another. But there was nothing. Just her same face, same body, same life. Except now she knew what came next. The knock on the door was bright and assertive. 3 sharp raps that could only belong to Miranda. Jessica dried her hands on her pajama pants, a habit that had annoyed her ex-boyfriend to no end, and walked to the door. Each step felt weighted, significant. The carpet under her feet was beige and industrial, worn thin in the traffic paths. She could feel the padding underneath giving way, the floor beneath that. Through the peephole, Miranda was a distorted fisheye version of herself. Oversized sunglasses pushed up on her head despite the gray weather, holding 2 coffee cups from Blue Bottle, dressed in what was probably a $1,000 ensemble made to look casual. She was checking her phone with her free hand, thumb scrolling, face set in that expression of focused attention she brought to everything. Jessica opened the door. "Thank God," Miranda said, pushing past her into the apartment. "I thought you might have actually ghosted me, which rude, considering I'm bringing you a $12 latte." The smell of the coffee filled the small entryway, rich and dark, with undertones of caramel and that burned sugar scent that came from over-roasted beans. Miranda always bought the most expensive thing on the menu, assuming that price correlated with quality. Sometimes it did. Often, it didn't. "You look like hell," Miranda continued, turning to appraise Jessica with the casual cruelty of long friendship. "Did you sleep?" "Not well," Jessica said, which was true enough. Miranda set the coffees on the kitchen table right next to the stack of mail. Her manicured hand, nails the color of fresh blood, perfectly shaped, hovered over the cream envelope for a moment before she picked it up. "Ooh, what's this? Looks fancy." Jessica's throat went tight. Just some... Summit Springs Resort and Spa cordially invites you to an exclusive preview weekend." Miranda read aloud, her voice taking on that mocking tone she used for anything she deemed beneath her. "A timeshare presentation? Really, Jess? I didn't know you were that desperate for a free weekend." "I'm not going," Jessica said quickly. Too quickly. She saw Miranda's eyebrows rise, saw the calculation happen behind her eyes. "You signed up for it, though. Not a question." Miranda set the envelope down and picked up one of the coffee cups, peeling back the plastic lid to blow on the surface. Steam rose in lazy spirals, disappearing into the vanilla-scented air. When? "Couple weeks ago. At the mall, they had a booth." This was true. All of it had been true the first time. Jessica had been shopping for a wedding gift for a coworker she barely knew, frustrated by the picked-over selection at Macy's when she'd passed the Summit Springs booth. The woman running it had been relentlessly cheerful, with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. She'd promised a free weekend, no obligations, just a chance to see the resort and enjoy some amenities. All Jessica had to do was sit through a short presentation. "And you said yes?" Miranda laughed, but there was something else in her voice. Interest, maybe. The kind of interest a cat showed in a wounded bird. "You?" "I was tired," Jessica said. She was persistent. "They always are." Miranda circled the small kitchen, her presence making it feel even smaller. She ran her finger along the counter, examined it as if checking for dust. "Still, a free weekend?" "Where is this place?" "North, up in the mountains, near that ski resort. The one that closed down." "The one where someone died?" "Different one." Miranda picked up the envelope again, sliding out the thick cardstock inside. Jessica watched her read, saw the exact moment when the hook set. Miranda's eyes sharpened, her posture straightened. She was like a bloodhound catching a scent. "Luxury accommodations," she read. Gourmet dining, full spa access, championship golf course. She looked up. When is this? This weekend. And you're not going? Jessica picked up the coffee Miranda had brought her. It was hot enough to be uncomfortable against her palms, even through the cardboard sleeve. She took a sip anyway, letting the heat sting her tongue. The taste was familiar, too sweet, too rich, trying too hard. Everything about Miranda's choices tried too hard. No, she said. I'm not going. Because I've already been there, Jessica thought. Because I've already sat through the presentation, already felt the slow, creeping realization that I'd made a terrible mistake. Because I've already signed the papers, already spent 2 years paying maintenance fees I couldn't afford for a week in a resort I never used. Because I know what comes next, and I'm not doing it again. Because it's a waste of time, she said instead. It's a scam. They're just trying to sell you something you don't need. Miranda's smile was sharp. Everything's a scam, sweetie. The trick is knowing which scams are worth it. She tapped the invitation against her palm, a rhythmic sound like a countdown. But if you're really not interested, and there it was. The moment that mattered, the fulcrum on which everything would turn. Jessica could see it happening in slow motion. Miranda's interest solidifying into desire, desire hardening into determination. Miranda wanted what Jessica was turning down, wanted it precisely because Jessica was turning it down. It was so predictable it would have been funny if it hadn't been so perfectly suited to what Jessica needed. You could go, Jessica said, carefully, casually, as if the idea had just occurred to her. The invitation says you and a guest. They don't care who shows up as long as someone does. Miranda's eyes narrowed. You do that? Just give it to me? Why not? I'm not using it. Jessica shrugged, the gesture feeling rehearsed even though it wasn't. You're always talking about needing a vacation. Well, here's a free one. There's no such thing as free. So don't buy anything. Sit through the presentation, take the free weekend, leave. You're good at saying no to salespeople. This was also true. Miranda treated sales pitches like personal challenges, opportunities to demonstrate her superiority. Jessica had watched her reduce more than one retail employee to frustrated silence. She was exactly the kind of person who would think she could outsmart a timeshare presentation. Miranda studied the invitation again, her thumb rubbing against the embossed logo. When would I need to confirm by? They want a call by Wednesday. And you're sure you don't want it? Jessica thought about the stack of bills that had come in that first timeline. The maintenance fees, the special assessments, the phone calls from the resort asking why she was behind on payments. She thought about the collection notices, the hit to her credit score, the way the whole thing had metastasized from a simple mistake into a years-long financial anchor. I'm sure, she said. Miranda smiled, a real smile this time, full of teeth and victory. Then I'll take it. Marcus has been on my ass about not spending enough time together. Maybe I'll bring him. He likes golf. Marcus? Of course. Jessica had forgotten about Marcus in the chaos of finding herself back in February. Miranda's boyfriend of the month, a finance bro with a gym addiction and a portfolio he wouldn't shut up about. They'd broken up by April in the original timeline, something about him sleeping with a paralegal from his firm. Jessica wondered if that was still going to happen, or if her actions were already creating ripples in the timeline. Not her problem either way. Perfect, Jessica said. I'll call them tomorrow. Let them know there's been a change. Tell them it's Miranda Chen, Chen. Miranda finished her coffee in 3 long swallows and dropped the empty cup in the trash with a decisive thunk. God, this is perfect. I've been so stressed with the Henderson merger. A weekend away is exactly what I need. She pulled out her phone, already scrolling through her calendar, making space for the trip. Jessica watched her, feeling something complicated settle in her chest. Not quite guilt, not quite satisfaction, something in between, like the feeling you get when you step on a bug that's been bothering you, a sense of problem solved mixed with a vague discomfort at your own capacity for small cruelties. But Miranda wasn't a bug. Miranda was a friend. Had been a friend anyway, once. Back in college when they'd stayed up late studying for finals, back when Miranda's ambition had seemed admirable instead of exhausting. Before Miranda had gotten the job at the investment firm, before she'd started measuring everything in terms of networking opportunities and career advancement, before she'd started treating friendship like a transaction, something with costs and benefits to be calculated, before Jessica had signed that timeshare contract and Miranda had... Jessica's thoughts stuttered to a halt. What had Miranda done in the original timeline? Something. Something important. The memory was there, just out of reach, like a word on the tip of her tongue. "Jess, you okay?" Miranda was looking at her with something that might have been concern, though with Miranda it was hard to tell. Concern and calculation often wore the same expression. "Fine," Jessica said. "Just tired." "You said that already." Miranda slipped her phone back in her purse, designer leather, tan, with gold hardware that caught the light. "Look, I know you've been having a rough time lately, the breakup with Daniel, the stuff with work, but you can't just hole up in here forever. You need to get out, do something, live a little." The advice was hollow, generic, the kind of thing you said when you were obligated to care but didn't want to dig too deep. Jessica knew this because she'd heard it before, in this conversation and others. Miranda's brand of friendship was all surface. She'd show up when you needed someone to drink with or complain to, but anything deeper than that made her uncomfortable. "I'm living," Jessica said. "Barely." Miranda headed for the door, heels clicking against the linoleum in a staccato rhythm. "Anyway, I've got to run. Meeting at 11. But thank you for this. Seriously. You're saving my sanity." Jessica followed her to the door, unlocked it, pulled it open. The hallway beyond smelled like someone's cooking, something with onions and garlic, heavy and lingering. Mrs. Patterson, probably, though the scent was coming from the wrong direction. "Have fun at the resort," Jessica said. Miranda paused in the doorway, turned back with a grin that was pure triumph. "Oh, I will. And who knows? Maybe I'll actually buy something, if the numbers make sense." The door closed behind her with a soft click. Jessica stood in the sudden silence, listening to the sound of Miranda's heels receding down the hallway, to the ding of the elevator, the eventual hum of it descending. She waited until she heard the faint sound of a car engine starting, the quiet that meant Miranda was truly gone. Then she walked back to the kitchen table and picked up the cream-colored envelope. The cardstock was thick, expensive. You could tell the resort spent money on marketing, on creating an impression of luxury and exclusivity. The logo was embossed in gold foil. A mountain peak with a rising sun, the kind of generic imagery that could have represented any resort anywhere. Inside, the invitation detailed everything Miranda had read aloud: the luxury accommodations, the amenities, the promise of a weekend that would change your life. That last part was even true in a way. Jessica thought about the presentation she'd sat through. In that other timeline, the salesman, his name had been Rick, or maybe Rich, with his practiced smile and his rehearsed stories about family vacations and making memories. The conference room with the coffee that had gone cold while he talked about ownership and investment and building generational wealth. The way he'd made the timeshare sound not just reasonable but inevitable, a obvious choice that only an idiot would pass up. She thought about the contract she'd signed, 37 pages of legal jargon that she'd barely read. The maintenance fees that had seemed manageable in the abstract, but had stung every time she paid them. The growing realization that she'd bought a problem, not a solution. And then, 6 months after she'd signed, the special assessment letter had arrived. $12,000, her share of emergency repairs to the resort's infrastructure, owed, due in 90 days. Non-negotiable, non-refundable, enshrined in the contract she'd signed without reading carefully enough. Jessica set down the invitation and walked to her laptop, still open on the coffee table where she'd left it last night. The screen had gone dark. She touched the trackpad and it lit up, showing her desktop, a generic mountain landscape she'd never bothered to change. A few clicks brought up her browser, her search history. There it was, from last night at 2 a.m. when sleep wouldn't come. Summit Springs Resort Special Assessment 2025. The search results were limited. A few forum posts from timeshare owners complaining about maintenance fees, a handful of reviews on travel sites. Nothing about special assessments yet, because it hadn't happened yet. Wouldn't happen until August. So when the resort would discover catastrophic foundation problems in Building C. Wouldn't be announced until September, when the board would vote to levy the assessment against all owners. But it would happen. Jessica knew it would happen with the same certainty she knew her own name. She closed the laptop and leaned back against the couch. The upholstery was rough against her neck, worn thin from years of use by previous tenants. Outside, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, the kind of moisture that was less than rain but more than mist, the kind that soaked you without you quite noticing. Her phone buzzed. A text from Miranda, "Seriously? Thank you again. You're the best." Jessica didn't reply. The next day arrived in shades of gray. Jessica woke to her alarm at 6:30 a.m. The same alarm that had woken her every workday for the past 3 years. The sound was aggressively cheerful, some generic marimba melody that was supposed to ease you into consciousness, but instead made you want to throw your phone across the room. She let it play for exactly 30 seconds, her usual buffer between sleep and action, before silencing it. The ceiling above her bed had a water stain in the shape of Australia, or maybe a deformed hand. She'd spent more hours than she cared to admit staring at it, mapping its borders, imagining what combination of leaks and structural failure had created this particular mark. It was still there, unchanged. Proof that at least some things remained constant across timelines. She showered in water that took 3 minutes to heat up, a quirk of the building's plumbing that the landlord kept promising to fix. The shower had sprayed in 6 distinct streams, one of which shot sideways and hit the wall no matter how you adjusted it. She washed her hair with the grocery store shampoo Miranda mocked, conditioned it with the matching conditioner, and tried not to think about the fact that she'd done all of this before. Except she hadn't. Not exactly. That was the thing about living a day twice. It was the same and different in ways that made your brain hurt if you thought about it too long. The water was the same temperature, the shower head still defective, but she was different. She knew what today would bring. And tomorrow, and the day after that, she knew that Dave from Regulatory would stop by her desk at 10:15 to ask about the defibrillator manual. She knew that the vending machine on the second floor would eat someone's dollar at 2:30, leading to a 10-minute argument about corporate responsibility. She knew that she'd stay late to finish the manual, that she'd grab fast food on the way home, that she'd eat it in front of her laptop while half watching a show she didn't care about. She knew all of this, and it filled her with a weariness that had nothing to do with lack of sleep. The drive to work was muscle memory. Left out of the apartment complex, right on Sycamore, straight through 3 lights to the highway on-ramp. Her car was a 2015 Honda Civic with a dent in the rear bumper from a parking lot encounter she'd never figured out the origin of. The radio was stuck on NPR, the volume knob broken in a way that made fine-tuning impossible. You could have it too quiet or too loud. But never quite right. This morning they were discussing climate policy. A senator from somewhere was explaining why his state couldn't possibly meet the new emissions targets. His voice had that particular quality of politicians everywhere. Smooth and reasonable and utterly unconvincing. Jessica listened without really hearing. Her attention on the road and the memory of other drives, other mornings, other versions of this exact commute. The parking lot at MedEquip Solutions was half full when she arrived. She parked in her usual spot, 3rd row from the back, under the oak tree that would drop acorns on her windshield all through September. The building was modern in the way of the early 2000s. Lots of glass and steel, already starting to show its age in the stained concrete and the HVAC system that rattled. So the lobby smelled like industrial carpet and the burnt coffee someone always made too early and too strong. Her badge beeped against the reader. The sound was high and electronic, part of the symphony of office noises she'd learned to tune out. The elevator was waiting, doors open, as if it had known she was coming. She stepped inside and pressed 3, watched the doors close on her reflection. A woman in business casual, hair still slightly damp, carrying a bag that held her lunch and laptop and the accumulated debris of professional life. The 3rd floor was quiet. She was early, as always. Her desk was in the northeast corner, part of a cluster of technical writers who all shared the same general mission: translate engineer speak into something human beings could understand. Her computer took 90 seconds to boot up, a lag time she'd once tried to report to IT before learning that 90 seconds was actually good compared to some departments. While she waited, she looked at the photos on her desk. There were 3, one of her parents on their 40th anniversary, smiling in front of the Grand Canyon, one of her college roommate's wedding, where Jessica had been a bridesmaid in a dress the color of mint toothpaste, and one of her and Daniel on a beach in Mexico, both of them sunburned and happy before everything had fallen apart. She should take that one down. She'd thought it before in the other timeline. Had actually done it, eventually, sometime around June. But looking at it now, with the weight of 2 lifetimes pressing on her, she felt only a distant sadness. Daniel was probably still asleep in his apartment across town, or in the bed they used to share, maybe with the girl from his office he'd sworn was just a friend. Or maybe not. Maybe that hadn't happened yet, wouldn't happen for another month or two. It didn't matter anymore. Her computer chimed, fully loaded. The desktop showed the same mountain landscape as her personal laptop. She'd never bothered to customize either one. She opened her email, watched the unread count climb as messages loaded. 43 new emails since she'd left yesterday. Most of them were garbage, company newsletters she never read, automated notifications about system updates, the daily motivational message from HR that no one had asked for. But there, 10 messages down, was one from Dave Kaczmarek in Regulatory Affairs. Subject, defibrillator manual status. She didn't need to open it. She knew what it said. Dave wrote every email the same way. Overly formal opening, 3-sentence question, sign-off that included his full title and contact information. He wanted to know when the manual would be done, needed it by end of week for the submission, hoped she was having a good Tuesday. Except it was Wednesday. The original email had come on Wednesday. She was a day early. Jessica stared at the screen, feeling the small wrongness of it. The timeline had already shifted, just slightly. She'd given the timeshare invitation to Miranda on Monday instead of Tuesday. She'd called Summit Springs yesterday to update the reservation, a day earlier than before. And now here was Dave asking his question 24 hours ahead of schedule. Did it matter? Could small changes cascade into larger ones? The butterfly effect they were always talking about in movies? Or was time more rigid than that? Flowing around obstacles like water around a stone, arriving at the same destination regardless of the route? She didn't know, had no way of knowing. "Jessica, you're early." She looked up to find Patricia Chen standing at the edge of her cubicle. Patricia was the senior writer, 10 years older than Jessica, and infinitely more patient with the peculiarities of medical device documentation. She was holding a mug that said, "World's okayest writer," and wore a cardigan with a coffee stain near the third button that she'd probably already forgotten about. "Couldn't sleep?" Jessica said, which was becoming her default answer to everything. "I know the feeling." Patricia took a sip from her mug, made a face. "This coffee is basically battery acid. I don't know why I keep drinking it." "Because the alternative is being awake without caffeine." "Truth." Patricia glanced at Jessica's screen, at the email from Dave. "He's already bothering you? It's not even 8. Dave doesn't believe in time zones or appropriate business hours, or personal boundaries, or social cues, or the concept of reasonable deadlines." Patricia leaned against the cubicle wall, settling in for a chat. She did this every morning, a ritual of commiseration before the real work began. "You finished the defibrillator manual?" "Almost. Just needs the final review." "Want me to take a look? Fresh eyes might catch something." This was different too. In the original timeline, Patricia hadn't offered to review the manual until Friday, night after Jessica had already submitted it to Dave and he'd found a dozen formatting errors. The offer had felt like salt in a wound then. Too little, too late, more proof that Jessica couldn't do anything right. But now, 2 days early, it felt like grace. "That would be great," Jessica said. "Thank you." "No problem. Send it over when you're ready." Patricia pushed off from the wall, started to leave, then paused. "Hey, you doing okay? You seem, I don't know, off." Jessica considered her answer. She could say she was fine, the automatic response. She could mention the breakup with Daniel, which was recent enough to be a valid excuse for being off. She could talk about stress or insomnia, or any of the other acceptable reasons for not being your best self. Instead, she said, "Just thinking about choices." Patricia's eyebrows rose. "Heavy thoughts for a Wednesday morning?" "Tuesday," Jessica corrected automatically, then caught herself. "I mean Wednesday. Sorry, lost track of the days." "Happens to the best of us." Patricia smiled, but there was something assessing in her look, like she was seeing Jessica for the first time. "Choices, huh? Anything you want to talk about?" "Not really, just wondering how different things would be if we made different choices. You know, the sliding doors thing." "Ah, the eternal question." Patricia took another sip of her terrible coffee. "For what it's worth, I think we overestimate how much control we have. Most of the big stuff in life just happens to us. We're just along for the ride, making the best of it." Jessica thought about the timeshare invitation, about Miranda's perfectly manicured hand reaching for it, about the special assessment that was coming, inevitable as winter. "Maybe," she said, "but some choices matter more than others." "True enough." Patricia glanced at her watch. An actual watch, not her phone, because Patricia believed in analog timekeeping. I should get to my desk before the engineers start sending their morning panic emails. But seriously, send me that manual. I'll get it back to you by lunch. She left, cardigan swishing, coffee mug leaving a faint trail of steam. Jessica watched her go, then turned back to her computer. The email from Dave still waited, unanswered. She clicked reply, typed a quick response. We'll have it to you by tomorrow, noon at the latest. Sent. The rest of the morning unfolded in the peculiar rhythm of office work. She reviewed the defibrillator manual, found 3 typos and one section where she'd accidentally repeated a paragraph. Fixed them, sent it to Patricia for review, answered emails about other projects, attended a meeting about updating the style guide, listened to 2 engineers argue about the proper nomenclature for a catheter component. At 10:15, Dave appeared at her desk exactly as she'd known he would. Hey Jessica, just wanted to check on that manual. Oh, you already replied. He was looking at his phone, scrolling through his email. Tomorrow by noon. Perfect. You're a lifesaver. He was a small man, Dave. Not in stature, but in presence. The kind of person who seemed to apologize for existing just by being in the room. He wore the same 3 button-down shirts on rotation. Blue, white, and a pattern that might have been intended as professional, but came across as tablecloth. Today was blue. Happy to help, Jessica said, because that's what you said. I know this is a tight deadline. Really appreciate you making it work. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, a nervous habit. Lot of pressure from upstairs on this submission. You know how it is. She did know. She knew that this particular submission would be approved without major issues, that the defibrillator would be on the market by July, that Mediquip would get a nice write-up in a trade publication about their innovative safety features. She knew all of this, and it made the present moment feel like watching a play she'd already seen, going through motions whose outcome was already determined. It'll be fine, she said. The manual's in good shape. You always say that, then it's always better than good shape. He smiled, a quick flash of teeth. Anyway, thanks again. I'll let you get back to it. He left. The morning continued. At 11:30, Patricia returned with her review of the manual. Minimal changes, mostly suggestions for clarity rather than corrections of errors. Jessica made the updates, saved the file, set a reminder to send it to Dave tomorrow morning. Lunch was a salad from the cafeteria that tasted like regret and ranch dressing. She ate it at her desk while reading an article about timeshare fraud, the kind of deep-dive journalism that made you angry and helpless in equal measure. The article detailed the high-pressure sales tactics, the contracts designed to confuse, the difficulty of escaping once you'd signed. It described special assessments as a common tool for extracting additional money from owners, emergency repairs, necessary upgrades, consequences of deferred maintenance coming due all at once. One owner quoted in the article had been hit with a $15,000 assessment. Another had paid $8,000. The resort in the article wasn't Summit Springs, but the pattern was the same. It was always the same. Jessica finished her salad and threw the plastic container in the recycling bin, where it landed with a hollow thunk. Outside her window, the sky was clearing. Patches of blue emerged from the gray, tentative, like they weren't sure they'd be welcome. By this evening, it would be completely clear, the temperature dropping into the 30s. She knew this because she'd lived this February before. But also because she'd checked the weather forecast this morning, a small act of verification to confirm she wasn't losing her mind. The forecast had been exactly what she'd remembered, which proved either that her memories were accurate or that she was consistently delusional. She wasn't sure which possibility was more disturbing. At 2:30, someone's dollar was eaten by the second-floor vending machine. Jessica heard about it through the office gossip chain. Beth in accounting had tried to buy a Diet Coke. The machine had taken her money without dispensing the drink, and now she was on the phone with the building manager demanding a refund. The conversation was apparently getting heated. Jessica had felt bad for Beth the first time, had even gone down and offered to buy her a replacement Diet Coke from the cafeteria. Beth had thanked her. They'd had a brief chat about the general incompetence of vending machine maintenance, and Jessica had felt like she'd done a small kindness. This time, she stayed at her desk. At 5 p.m., when most people were packing up to leave, Jessica found herself staring at her computer screen with a document open but no words typed. The cursor blinked at her, patient, waiting for input that wouldn't come. She was supposed to be starting the initial draft of an infusion pump manual, But her mind couldn't engage with the task. All she could think about was Miranda at Summit Springs this weekend, sitting through the presentation, hearing the pitch, making a choice. Would Miranda sign? She was smarter than Jessica, more skeptical, better with money. But she was also competitive in a way that made her vulnerable to a different kind of manipulation. If the salesman framed it as an exclusive opportunity, something not everyone qualified for, Miranda would take it as a challenge to prove she did qualify. If they showed her numbers and projections, Miranda would want to prove she could see the value others missed. Jessica had seen it happen in other contexts. Miranda couldn't resist a chance to demonstrate her superiority. Still here, Patricia was standing in the hallway, coat on, bag over her shoulder. The third floor had emptied out while Jessica had been thinking, the open office plan now a ghost town of empty desks and darkened monitors. "Just finishing something up," Jessica said. "The thing you were staring at for the last 20 minutes without typing?" Jessica managed a smile. "You caught me. Go home, Jessica. Whatever it is can wait until tomorrow." Patricia adjusted her bag, a well-worn leather thing she'd probably owned for a decade. Or it cannot get done at all. The world won't end if one manual runs behind schedule. Dave might disagree. Dave thinks everything is urgent. It's exhausting. Patricia started walking toward the elevator, then paused and looked back. "You know what I think? I think you care too much about this stuff. It's just work. It's important, sure, but it's not your whole life. Or it shouldn't be." Jessica thought about her apartment, waiting for her in the dusk. About the fast food she would probably grab, the show she would half watch, the hours she would spend doing nothing of consequence before going to bed and doing it all again. Patricia was right. Work wasn't her whole life. But she wasn't sure what else there was. "I'll head out soon," she said. "Promise?" "Promise." Patricia left, and Jessica was alone on the third floor. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, a sound you could only hear when everything else was quiet. Outside the window, the sun was setting in bands of orange and pink, beautiful in the way February sunsets could be when the air was clear and cold. She saved the blank document without typing anything, shut down her computer, gathered her things. The drive home was traffic and radio voices, the same route in reverse. Left on Oak, straight through two lights, right on Sycamore. The apartment complex appeared ahead, its parking lot filling up with people returning from work. Mrs. Patterson's Lincoln was in its spot, angled as always. Jessica parked, climbed the stairs to her apartment. They unlocked the door and stepped into the smell of vanilla and dust. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. The coffee mug from Monday morning still sat in the sink, the stack of mail still occupied the table. Nothing had changed. Everything was the same. She sat on the couch without turning on the lights, watching the room darken as the sun set. She thought about time, about choices, about the strange mercy of being given a second chance, and the burden of knowing what would happen next. She thought about Miranda driving up to Summit Springs this weekend, excited for a free vacation, not knowing that the price would come later. Should she warn her, call her right now, tell her not to sign anything, explain about the special assessments and the maintenance fees and the trap that was being set? But what would she say? How would she explain that she knew these things? She could try to frame it as research, as having looked into Summit Springs after getting the invitation. But Miranda would ask questions, would want to know details, would poke holes in any story Jessica tried to tell. And even if Jessica convinced her about the resort, Miranda would still go. She'd go just to prove she couldn't be scammed, that she was smarter than the salespeople. No, the only way to protect Miranda was to prevent her from ever going. And Jessica had already set the opposite in motion. Her phone buzzed. A text from Miranda. "Hey, just confirmed the Summit Springs reservation for this weekend. Marcus is so excited. We're planning to drive up Friday afternoon, make a whole weekend of it, thank you again." Jessica stared at the message. The emoji at the end, a heart, bright and cheerful, felt like mockery. But Miranda didn't mean it that way. Miranda never meant anything the way it came across. She was just excited, just happy to have gotten something for free, just looking forward to a weekend away, just walking into the trap Jessica had set. Jessica typed, "Have fun," added a smiley emoji because that's what you did. Sent. 3 dots appeared, indicating Miranda was typing. Then disappeared. Then appeared again. Finally, "We will. You should come visit us sometime when we own our week. It'll be amazing." Jessica didn't respond to that. She ordered Chinese food for dinner, eating it straight from the containers while sitting on her couch in the dark. The lo mein was greasy, the egg roll soggy, the fortune cookie stale. Her fortune read, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." She ate it anyway, the paper sticking to her tongue. Friday arrived like a held breath finally released. Jessica woke to sunlight streaming through her window, rare for February, and the sound of someone's car alarm going off in the parking lot. The alarm cycled through its repertoire, whooping, honking, voice shouting, "Step away from the vehicle," over and over until someone finally shut it off. She lay in bed afterward, staring at the ceiling, at the water stain shaped like Australia or a deformed hand. Today, Miranda and Marcus would drive up to Summit Springs. They'd arrive in the evening, check into the luxury suite that Summit Springs used for presentations, enjoy the complimentary champagne and chocolate-covered strawberries. And they'd have dinner at the resort restaurant, something expensive and mediocre, and go to bed thinking they'd pulled one over on the system. Tomorrow morning, they'd attend the presentation. Jessica knew the script. She'd lived it, knew that it would start casually, more like a conversation than a sales pitch. The salesman would ask about their lives, their careers, their dreams. He'd nod sympathetically when they talked about being too busy, about never having enough time to relax. He'd paint a picture of ownership as a solution to a problem they didn't know they had. Then would come the numbers. Not the real numbers. Not yet. First, the theoretical numbers. How much they spent on vacations per year. How much that would cost over a decade, 2 decades, a lifetime. The mounting cost of hotels and rental properties. Money paid to strangers for temporary access to places that would never really be theirs. And then, this was the pivot point, the moment that mattered. He'd talk about ownership, about building equity, about legacy, about having a place that was truly yours. He'd show them photos of families, multiple generations gathered in the same resort week, year after year. He'd talk about tradition, about creating memories, about what you'd leave behind for your children. He'd make it sound inevitable. Jessica had signed the contract at 11:47 a.m. on a Saturday morning. She knew this because the timestamp was printed on the copy they'd given her, the one she'd studied later, trying to figure out where the trap had been hidden. She'd been thinking about her parents when she signed it, about how they'd never taken vacations when she was growing up because they couldn't afford them, about how she could afford this barely, and wouldn't it be nice to have a place to go? A week that was hers? A break from the endless grind of work and bills and life? The salesman's name had been Rich. Richard Peterson. He'd had a wedding ring and photos of his kids on his desk and a way of looking at you that made you feel like he really cared whether you understood the opportunity he was offering. He'd shaken her hand after she signed, told her she'd made a great choice, told her she wouldn't regret it. By August, she'd regretted it. By September, when the special assessment letter arrived, regret had crystallized into something harder and colder. But now it was Friday morning, and none of that had happened yet. Wouldn't happen to her at all. Would happen to Miranda instead, if everything went according to plan. Jessica got out of bed. Work was quiet, the office half empty in that pre-weekend way. People left early on Fridays, finding reasons to duck out at 3 o'clock or 4 o'clock to start their weekends ahead of schedule. Jessica had sent Dave the defibrillator manual that morning as promised, had spent the rest of the day doing mindless updates to documentation templates, the kind of work that required minimal brain power and maximum patience. At 3:30, her phone buzzed with a text from Miranda. "Just left the city. Traffic's not too bad. ETA around 6. We'll send pics when we get there." Jessica looked at the message for a long moment before responding, "Drive safe." 3 dots. Then, "Always." The afternoon crawled. Jessica left at 5 o'clock exactly. Oh, no earlier, no later. The drive home was a golden hour light. Everything soft and amber, beautiful enough to hurt. She stopped at the grocery store because her fridge was empty, walked the aisles selecting items with the focused attention of someone trying not to think about other things. Milk, bread, cheese, a rotisserie chicken that sat under heat lamps looking both appealing and sad, some apples that were probably mealy but looked okay, a bottle of wine because why not? At home, she put the groceries away, then immediately opened the wine. It was a cheap Pinot Grigio, the kind with a screw top and a label that featured a generic watercolor landscape. It tasted like what it was. mass-produced adequacy. She poured a glass anyway, then a second. By 6:30, she was slightly drunk and refreshing Miranda's Instagram. No new posts yet. While Miranda was probably still checking in, dealing with luggage, Marcus probably complaining about something because Marcus always complained about something. They'd go to dinner around 7:30, linger over dessert and after-dinner drinks, not get back to the room until 10 o'clock or later. The presentation was scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow. Miranda had mentioned it in one of her texts earlier in the week. They want us there at 10, but they said it's super casual. Just a conversation, maybe an hour. It would be 3 hours. They'd start saying they wanted to leave around hour 2, but there would always be one more thing, one more scenario to discuss, one more option to consider. By hour 3, they'd be exhausted, worn down, ready to agree to anything just to make it stop. Jessica poured a third glass of wine. At 8:47 p.m., Miranda posted to Instagram a photo of her and Marcus in the resort restaurant, both of them dressed up, Marcus looking uncomfortable in a blazer he probably didn't want to wear. The caption read, "Mountain getaway, thanks at Jessica Monroe for the hookup. #luxury travel #blessed." Jessica stared at the photo. Miranda's smile was bright, genuine, the kind of happiness that came from getting something you thought you deserved. Marcus had his arm around her, his smile more forced but present. They looked like a couple in a commercial for resort living, attractive and successful, and completely unaware of what was coming. Jessica closed Instagram without liking the post. Saturday morning, she woke up with a headache that had nothing to do with the wine and everything to do with tension. She dreamed fitfully. Fragments of conversations, papers being signed, bills arriving in the mail with numbers that kept changing. She'd woken up multiple times checking her phone, even though she knew Miranda wouldn't text during the presentation. At 10 a.m., Jessica imagined Miranda and Marcus walking into the conference room. They'd be offered coffee, maybe bagels, the kind of hospitality that was designed to create a sense of obligation. Rich Peterson would greet them warmly, shake their hands, tell them how glad he was they could make it. At 10:15, he'd start talking about Summit Springs' history, its amenities, its position as one of the premier mountain resorts in the region. At 10:30, he'd transition to talking about their lives, their careers, their dreams. At 11 o'clock, he'd introduce the concept of ownership. At 11:30, they'd be looking at numbers, at floor plans, at calendar grids showing available weeks. At 12 o'clock, they'd be saying they needed to think about it, but Rich would have answers for every objection. Jessica knew all of this with the certainty of lived experience. She could have drawn a map of the conference room, described the coffee stains on the table, told you exactly which chair wobbled. She'd sat in that chair, had listened to the same pitch, had made the same mistake Miranda was about to make. Except Miranda wouldn't make it. Miranda was smarter, more skeptical, better with money. Miranda would see through the sales tactics, would recognize the manipulation, would walk out without signing anything. Wouldn't she? Jessica made coffee and burned it. Poured it out, made more, burned that too. Finally gave up and made tea instead, letting the bag steep until the water was dark enough to be coffee adjacent. She drank it while staring out her window at the parking lot, at the empty spaces where people's cars should be. Everyone was out living their Saturday, doing Saturday things, unaware that somewhere in the mountains Miranda Chen was making a decision that would haunt her for years. Or wouldn't. Maybe Miranda would walk out. Maybe Jessica had worried for nothing. At 1 p.m., her phone buzzed. Miranda. OMG, Jess, this place is incredible. They're showing us the owner's lounge, there's a hot tub and everything. Marcus is actually smiling for once, LOL. Jessica's stomach dropped. The owner's lounge. That was part of the closing pitch, the final seduction. They only showed you the owner's lounge if you were close to signing, if they thought they had you. It was a glimpse of exclusivity, of belonging to something special. She typed, "That's nice. Be careful with the sales pitch." The response came quickly. "Oh, we're way past that. They're just showing us around now. Super low pressure. Actually nice people." Super low pressure. That's what Jessica had thought too, right up until she'd signed. She put down her phone, picked it up again, started to type a warning, deleted it, started again, deleted again. What could she say? Don't sign anything because in 6 months there will be a special assessment? How would she know that? Why would Miranda believe her? The truth was impossible. The lie was unconvincing. Silence was the only option that made sense, and silence felt like complicity. At 2:30 p.m., They're offering us a charter owner rate if we sign today. Significant discount. Marcus and I are talking it over at 3:15 p.m. Okay, so we're seriously considering this. The numbers actually make sense? Like, we spend $4K on vacations anyway. This would be $3K per year for a guaranteed week in an amazing place. Plus, it appreciates. Marcus ran the numbers and he thinks it's smart. Marcus ran the numbers. Marcus, who worked in finance, who thought he could calculate his way to certainty. Jessica almost laughed. She'd run the numbers too, had convinced herself they made sense. Numbers always made sense when you wanted them to. At 4 p.m. We did it! We're owners! They're bringing champagne to celebrate. This is so exciting. Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. We literally never would have known about it without you. Jessica read the message 3 times. We did it. We're owners. Thank you. She set down her phone very carefully as if it might explode. Outside, the sun was starting its descent, casting long shadows across the parking lot. A family was loading into a car, kids arguing about something, parents looking tired, normal Saturday things, normal life. She'd done it. She'd actually done it. She'd taken the trap meant for her and handed it to someone else, and they'd walked right into it. The feeling in her chest wasn't satisfaction. It was something darker, something that tasted like metal and sat heavy in her stomach. She'd saved herself by sacrificing Miranda, had used her knowledge of the future to shift the burden from her own shoulders to someone else's. It was smart. It was strategic. It was survival. It was also cruel. Jessica walked to the kitchen and poured the rest of the wine down the sink, watched the pale liquid spiral down the drain, disappearing into pipes and sewers and eventually the ocean. She gripped the counter, feeling the laminate edge press into her palms. This was what she'd wanted. This was the plan. Miranda signs the contract. Miranda gets stuck with the maintenance fees. Miranda receives the special assessment when it comes. Miranda, who had money and resources and a finance boyfriend who thought he was smarter than everyone else. Miranda could handle it. Miranda would be fine. Jessica repeated this to herself like a mantra. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Miranda. They're taking our picture for the owner's wall. We're going to be in the lobby. How cool is that? Very cool, Jessica thought. Very cool right up until August. She didn't respond. The weeks after Miranda's signing unfolded with the strange quality of a movie you'd already seen but couldn't turn off. Jessica went through the motions of her life. Work, home, sleep, repeat, while carrying the knowledge of what was coming like a stone in her pocket. March arrived in fits and starts, winter refusing to fully release its grip. There were days of premature warmth that had people digging out shorts and sandals, followed by cold snaps that made you remember why you still had your winter coat. The crocuses that appeared in the apartment complex's neglected flower beds got fooled by the false spring and bloomed too early, their purple heads bowed against the frost that came after. Miranda texted frequently in those first weeks after Summit Springs, photos of the owner's portal on Summit Springs' website. I've screenshots of the calendar showing available weeks, messages about planning their first stay. Marcus had apparently become obsessed with maximizing their investment, researching the best weeks to book, looking into the rental market for weeks they wouldn't use themselves. Did you know we can rent out our week for like $2K? Miranda texted one evening. That's basically free money. Jessica, lying on her couch in the dark, replied, Sounds great. She'd looked into renting her week too. In the original timeline, had discovered that the rental market was flooded with timeshare owners all trying to do the same thing, all convinced they'd stumbled onto a money-making scheme. The actual rental rate she'd gotten was $400, barely enough to cover a quarter of the maintenance fees. She'd tried twice, succeeded once, and given up. But she didn't tell Miranda this. She just sent supportive emojis and changed the subject whenever possible. Work provided a welcome distraction. The defibrillator manual was approved with minimal changes. Dave in regulatory actually sent a complimentary email about the quality of her work. Jessica started on the infusion pump documentation, losing herself in the technical details of flow rates and alarm parameters. There was something soothing about the precision required, the careful arrangement of words to convey exact meaning. In documentation, ambiguity was the enemy. Everything had to be clear, unequivocal, provable. Unlike life, where everything was muddy and nothing was certain. She had lunch with Patricia a few times, coffee dates that stretched into conversations about work and life, and the various absurdities of both. Patricia was going through a divorce. Her husband had decided at 53 that he needed to find himself, which apparently involved a younger woman and a motorcycle. Patricia talked about it with a kind of bemused detachment, like she was narrating a story about someone else's life. 26 years, she said one afternoon, stirring her coffee with methodical precision. We were married for 26 years, and I genuinely have no idea who he is anymore, or if I ever did. They were at a cafe near the office, one of those places with exposed brick and reclaimed wood and prices that assumed you made more money than you did. Patricia had ordered something with oat milk and lavender. Jessica had gotten regular coffee and immediately regretted it when she saw the bill. "Do you regret it?" Jessica asked. Marrying him? Patricia considered this, her spoon making circles in her cup. Yes and no. I regret the last few years when we were both just going through the motions. But the beginning was good. The middle was good. And we have the kids. And I can't regret that. She looked up, met Jessica's eyes. I think regret is complicated. It's not all or nothing. You can regret parts of something while still valuing the whole. Jessica thought about Daniel, about the 2 years they'd spent together, about the good parts, the early dates, the easy intimacy, the feeling of being known, and about the end, the slow dissolution of something that had once felt permanent. Did she regret it? Parts of it, maybe, but not all of it. What made you think of marriage? Patricia asked. You and that boyfriend of yours, Daniel? You two thinking about taking the plunge? We broke up, Jessica said, a couple months ago. Oh. Patricia's expression shifted to something like sympathy. I'm sorry, I didn't know. It's fine, it was mutual. This was a lie, but a comfortable one. Daniel had ended it, but Jessica had seen it coming, had maybe even wanted it on some level. The relationship had run its course like water finding the lowest point. We just wanted different things. That's the most common reason, isn't it? Different things. Patricia took a sip of her lavender coffee, made a face. Why do we order things that sound good but taste weird? They talked about other things after that. The rumor that MedEquip might be acquired, Patricia's daughter's upcoming graduation, the ethics of office microwave fish, safe topics, surface topics, the kind of conversation that filled time without demanding vulnerability. But as Jessica drove home that evening, she found herself thinking about Patricia's words. Regret is complicated. You can regret parts of something while still valuing the whole. Could that apply to what she'd done with Miranda? She'd saved herself from financial ruin, which was valuable, but she'd done it by manipulating someone else into danger. Did the end justify the means? Did saving yourself count as enough reason to harm someone else, even if that someone else was wealthy enough to absorb the harm? Jessica didn't have an answer. She drove through the twilight, watching the world turn blue and then gray and then black, and tried not to think about it. April brought rain. Not the sporadic showers of early spring, but sustained precipitation that turned everything soggy and made the world smell like wet earth and rotting leaves. The parking lot developed puddles that never fully dried, and Mrs. Patterson's Lincoln acquired a coating of pollen and grime that turned it from silver to a murky yellow-green. Miranda was quieter now. The initial excitement of ownership had faded into the reality of planning. She and Marcus had booked a week in July, prime season, the most valuable time slot, and were now dealing with the logistics of getting time off work, coordinating their schedules, deciding what to do about Marcus's dog. I didn't realize how complicated this would be, Miranda said during one of their increasingly rare phone calls. Well, I thought you just showed up and everything was handled. Isn't that the whole point of ownership? Jessica asked. Having things handled? In theory, in practice there are a million details. Like, did you know we have to book dinner reservations 2 months in advance? And the golf course requires member certification for the championship holes? Marcus is annoyed because he thought he could just play whenever. Jessica made sympathetic noises. She'd learned these same lessons in the original timeline, had felt the same frustration at discovering that ownership came with rules and restrictions and bureaucracy. But she couldn't say any of that, so she just listened and offered platitudes about first-year learning curves. How's work? Miranda asked, changing subjects with the abruptness of someone who'd grown tired of their own complaints. Fine, busy the usual. You sound tired. I am tired. You're always tired lately. Are you sleeping okay? Jessica thought about her nights, the hours spent staring at the ceiling or scrolling through her phone or doing anything other than sleeping, about the dreams when sleep finally came, fragmented and strange, full of papers being signed and bills arriving and choices unmade and remade. Insomnia, she said. I should probably see someone about it. You should. That stuff adds up, you know. Lack of sleep. It makes everything worse. Miranda paused, and Jessica could hear voices in the background, the ambient sound of an office or restaurant. Listen, I have to go. Meeting in 5. But seriously, take care of yourself, okay? And maybe we should hang out soon. It's been weeks. Yeah, Jessica said. That would be nice. They hung up, and Jessica sat in her car in the office parking lot, engine still running, watching rain streak down the windshield. It was 5:47 p.m. on a Thursday. She'd left work precisely at 5:30, had walked to her car with her head down against the rain, had sat here for 17 minutes doing nothing. She should go home, should make dinner, do laundry, catch up on the shows she was always meaning to watch, should live her life, the life she'd saved by making the choices she'd made. Instead, she pulled out her phone and searched. Summit Springs Resort Foundation problems. The results were minimal. A few forum posts from timeshare owner sites, people complaining about various issues, broken elevators, pool heaters not working, the inconsistent Wi-Fi. Normal resort problems, nothing catastrophic, nothing about foundations or structural damage or emergency repairs. Because it hasn't happened yet, Jessica reminded herself. Won't happen until June, when routine maintenance will uncover cracks in Building C's foundation. Won't be fully assessed until July, won't be announced until August. Won't result in special assessments until September. She knew all this, had lived through it, had received the letter explaining that shifting soil and water damage had compromised the structural integrity, that repairs would cost $2.3 million, that all owners would be assessed their proportional share, $12,000. That had been her share. Due in 90 days, no exceptions, no payment plans. Failure to pay would result in liens and eventual foreclosure on the timeshare. So no, but foreclosure didn't eliminate the debt. You still owed it, still had to pay it. It just ruined your credit in addition to draining your bank account. Jessica had scraped together the money by maxing out credit cards and borrowing from her parents, who'd loaned it to her with expressions of disappointment and lectures about financial responsibility. She'd spent the next year paying it back, eating ramen and canceling subscriptions, and watching every dollar with the hypervigilance of someone who'd learned exactly how fast financial stability could evaporate. And now, it would be Miranda's problem instead. Miranda, who made 6 figures. Miranda, who had a boyfriend in finance. Miranda, who could probably write a check for $12,000 without devastating her life. That's what Jessica told herself anyway. That's what made it okay. She put her phone away and drove home through the rain. May was graduations and Mother's Day and the slow greening of the world. Jessica bought flowers for her mother, drove 3 hours to her parents' house for dinner, endured their questions about when she'd start dating again with the patience of someone who'd done this before. Her mother made pot roast, her father asked about work. They watched Jeopardy together, and Jessica got more answers right than she should have, though no one noticed because no one was really paying attention. On the drive back, her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. Miss Monroe, this is Richard Peterson from Summit Springs Resort. We have you in our system as having attended one of our preview events, and I wanted to follow up. Or see if you had any questions about ownership opportunities. Jessica's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Rich Peterson, the salesman, calling her now in May, because this was when he'd called the first time. When he'd caught her in a weak moment, convinced her to come back for a follow-up tour, laid the groundwork for the eventual sale. I'm not interested, she said. I completely understand, and I'm not trying to pressure you. I just wanted you to know that we're running a special promotion this month. I gave my invitation to a friend. She bought in. You already made your sale. There was a pause. I see. Well, that's wonderful. And if you're ever interested in joining her as an owner, we do have referral bonuses. I'm not interested, Jessica repeated. Please remove me from your call list. Of course. I apologize for the inconvenience. You have a great day. The line went dead. Jessica drove in silence for a while, processing. In the original timeline, she'd listened to his pitch. had agreed to come back for the follow-up tour, had signed the contract on that second visit, swept up in the momentum of having already invested time and attention. But this time, she'd said no. This time, she'd remembered what was coming and protected herself. This time, Miranda had taken her place. The thought sat in her chest like acid reflux. June arrived with heat and humidity, the kind of weather that made the air feel solid. Jessica's apartment didn't have central air, just a window unit that wheezed and dripped and barely kept the temperature below 80. She spent her evenings in minimal clothing, sitting in front of a fan, drinking ice water and trying not to think about the calendar. Miranda and Marcus were leaving for Summit Springs in 3 weeks. Miranda had been posting excited updates on social media. Countdowns, packing lists, photos of the new swimsuit she'd bought. The enthusiasm was genuine, untainted by any knowledge of what was lurking beneath the resort's glossy surface. Jessica had started having nightmares. In them, she was back in the conference room, signing the papers again, except when she looked down, the name on the contract was Miranda's. Or she was opening the special assessment letter, except it was addressed to both of them, some joint responsibility she couldn't escape. Or she was trying to warn Miranda, trying to explain about the foundation and the special assessment, but when she opened her mouth, no sound came out. She'd wake up sweating, disoriented, her apartment dark and close and unfamiliar. It would take minutes to remember where she was, when she was, to remember that she'd already made her choices and couldn't unmake them. On a Tuesday in mid-June, Jessica came home from work to find a letter in her mailbox. Cream-colored envelope, expensive stock, Summit Springs Resort logo in the corner. Her heart stopped. She stood in the small mailroom of her apartment complex, holding the envelope, feeling its weight. It was addressed to her, Jessica Monroe, in printed labels that looked computer-generated. Through the envelope, she could see a dark shape, a letter, folded once, maybe twice. With shaking hands, she opened it. "Dear valued guest," it began. "Thank you for attending our preview weekend. While we understand that ownership at Summit Springs wasn't right for you at this time, we wanted to reach out with an exclusive opportunity." Jessica stopped reading. It was just marketing. Just another attempt to get her to buy. She crumpled the letter and threw it in the recycling bin in the corner of the mailroom, where it landed among pizza boxes and Amazon packaging. But her hands were still shaking. That night, she broke her self-imposed rule and looked up Miranda's Instagram. The most recent post was from that afternoon, a photo of Summit Springs' website calendar, a red circle around the week in July. Caption, 3 weeks, can't wait. The comments were full of friends saying how jealous they were, how lucky Miranda was, how they wanted to visit when she was there. Miranda had responded to each one with variations on, "You're totally welcome," and "We should plan a trip." Jessica closed the app, stood up, sat down, stood up again, paced her small apartment in circuits, living room to kitchen to bedroom to bathroom and back. The walls felt too close. The air felt too thick. Everything felt wrong. She could still fix this. Could call Miranda right now, tell her there was something wrong with the resort, convince her to try to get out of the contract. It would be hard. Timeshare contracts were designed to be nearly impossible to escape. But maybe with a good lawyer, with enough pressure. Except Miranda wouldn't believe her, would ask how Jessica knew about problems that hadn't been announced yet, would poke holes in any explanation Jessica tried to give. And even if by some miracle Miranda did believe her, she'd want to know why Jessica hadn't warned her before she signed. Why Jessica had given her the invitation in the first place if she'd known it was a trap. And Jessica would have no good answer for that. So she did nothing, just paced her apartment until she was tired, then lay in bed until exhaustion pulled her under. The nightmares were waiting. July hit like a wall. The temperature spiked into the 90s and stayed there, turning the city into a concrete oven. Jessica's apartment building, built in an era before climate change was a daily consideration, became nearly uninhabitable. The window unit ran constantly, struggling against the heat, accomplishing nothing except driving up her electric bill. She started spending her evenings at the library, at coffee shops, anywhere with functional air conditioning. She'd bring her laptop and pretend to work on personal projects while actually just sitting in the cool air, watching other people live their lives. A mother with 2 kids arguing over which books to check out, a college student asleep on a couch, backpack as a pillow, notebook open to a page of unfinished equations, an elderly man reading the newspaper with the focus of someone who had nowhere else to be. Normal people, normal problems. No knowledge of timelines or consequences or choices that echoed across months. Miranda and Marcus left for Summit Springs on a Friday. Jessica knew because Miranda texted her a photo from the road. A scenic overlook, mountains in the distance, caption reading, "Adventure time." Jessica responded with a thumbs up emoji. It felt inadequate. But what else was there to say? The weekend passed with agonizing slowness. Jessica cleaned her apartment with obsessive thoroughness, scrubbing grout with a toothbrush, organizing her closet by color, throwing out expired food and old magazines, and anything else she could justify discarding. The physical activity helped, kept her hands busy and her mind slightly less occupied with thoughts of what was happening in the mountains. Miranda posted regularly to Instagram. Photos of the resort, the lobby with its vaulted ceilings and stone fireplace, the pool area with views of the mountains, their suite with its king bed and jacuzzi tub. Everything looked exactly as Jessica remembered it. Beautiful and luxurious and completely unsustainable. Saturday evening, a photo of Miranda and Marcus at dinner, both dressed up, wine glasses raised. Owner's dining room perks. Sunday morning, a photo of the golf course at sunrise, Marcus mid-swing. Early bird gets the tea time. Sunday afternoon, a selfie of Miranda in a spa robe, face mask on, cucumber slices over her eyes. Living my best life. Each post was cheerful, excited, completely oblivious. Jessica scrolled through them with the sick fascination of watching a car accident in slow motion. You knew the impact was coming, but you couldn't look away. Monday, Miranda called. "Jess, oh my God, this place is amazing. You should see it. Actually, you have seen it, right? You came for the preview." "Yeah," Jessica said. She was in her apartment lying on her couch in the dark despite it being 2 p.m. The curtains were closed against the heat. "I saw it. Isn't it incredible? So Marcus and I have been saying all weekend that giving this to us was literally the best gift. We're having such an amazing time." Gift. That's how Miranda saw it. As something Jessica had given her out of generosity, not something Jessica had used her for. "I'm glad you're enjoying it," Jessica managed. "We are. And you know what? We were talking and we think we might actually use this every year. Like this could become our thing. Our annual tradition. How cool would that be?" "Very cool," Jessica thought. "Very cool for about 2 more months." "That sounds nice," she said. "You okay? You sound weird." "Just tired. The heat's been brutal." "Oh God, I can imagine. It's perfect up here though. Mountain air, nice breeze. You should really come visit next year when we book." "I'm serious. We'd love to have you." Next year? Miranda was already planning next year, already imagining a future where the timeshare was a blessing instead of a curse, already building dreams on a foundation that was literally cracking beneath her feet. "Maybe," Jessica said, because she couldn't say what she was really thinking. They talked for a few more minutes, Miranda describing the resort amenities, Marcus apparently becoming obsessed with the resort's golf pro, the amazing French toast they'd had for breakfast, normal vacation talk, the kind of conversation people had when they were happy and relaxed and didn't know their world was about to shift. After they hung up, Jessica sat in the dark for a long time. The thing about guilt was that it wasn't logical. Jessica knew this. She'd saved herself from financial ruin, had made a smart choice given the circumstances. Miranda could afford the special assessment in a way Jessica never could have. Miranda had resources, had money, had a support system. The $12,000 would sting, but wouldn't devastate her. This was all true, all rational, all perfectly sensible justification for what Jessica had done. And yet, Jessica thought about the first time she'd received the special assessment letter, how she'd stared at it, reading it over and over, unable to believe it was real, how she'd called the resort to confirm it wasn't a mistake, had to listen to a bored customer service representative explain that yes, the assessment was real, yes, she was required to pay it, no, there were no exceptions. She thought about calling her parents, having to explain that she needed to borrow money because she'd made a stupid financial decision. Her father's silence on the other end of the line, her mother's careful questions about why she'd bought a timeshare in the first place, whether she'd read the contract, whether she'd considered the long-term implications. She thought about the shame of it, the feeling of being young and stupid and irresponsible, of having failed at the basic task of being an adult, the knowledge that her parents would always see her differently now, would always wonder if she could be trusted with important decisions. And she'd given all of that to Miranda. had shifted the burden, transferred the pain, redirected the consequences to someone else. It didn't matter that Miranda had made the choice herself, had signed the contract willingly. Jessica had created the conditions for that choice, had manipulated the situation to ensure Miranda would walk into the trap, had used her knowledge of the future to protect herself at Miranda's expense. That was the truth of it, stripped of all the rationalizations and justifications. Jessica had saved herself by sacrificing someone else. And no amount of reasoning about Miranda's wealth or resources could change that fundamental fact. Tuesday evening, Jessica opened her laptop and typed, "How to get out of a timeshare contract." The search results were extensive and depressing. Articles about exit companies that charged thousands of dollars and often failed to deliver. Forum posts from desperate owners trying everything from lawyers to bankruptcy. Warnings about scams targeting timeshare owners who wanted out. A few success stories. But they all involved specific circumstances. Buying in a cooling-off period, finding defects in the contract, proving fraud. Nothing that would help Miranda. Nothing that would undo what Jessica had done. She closed the laptop and went to bed even though it was only 8 p.m. Sleep came eventually, restless and unsatisfying, full of dreams she wouldn't remember in the morning. Miranda and Marcus returned from Summit Springs on Wednesday. Miranda posted a final photo from the resort. The two of them in the lobby, luggage beside them, both smiling. Until next time, #owner's life. That evening, Miranda texted, "Just got home, officially post-vacation depressed, LOL. Work tomorrow is going to be brutal. But seriously, thank you again for the opportunity. Oh, best weekend ever." Jessica stared at the message for 5 full minutes before responding. "Glad you had fun." 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. "We should get together soon. Feels like I haven't seen you in forever. Drinks this weekend?" Jessica's first instinct was to say no, to make an excuse, to avoid seeing Miranda face to face while carrying this weight of knowledge and guilt. But what would that solve? She couldn't avoid Miranda forever. And maybe seeing her would help, would remind Jessica that Miranda was fine, was happy, was perfectly capable of handling whatever came next. "Sure," she typed. "Saturday? Perfect. I'll text you details. Miss you." Jessica set down her phone and looked around her apartment. Everything was exactly as it had been. The same furniture, the same arrangement, the same water stain on the ceiling shaped like Australia or a deformed hand. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Beautiful and temporary, like everything else. The next 6 weeks passed in a state of suspended tension. Jessica went to work, came home, lived her life with the knowledge of what was coming, sitting like a stone in her chest. She met Miranda for drinks that Saturday. A wine bar Miranda chose, expensive and pretentious, full of people who laughed too loud and talked too much. Miranda was in high spirits, full of plans for their next visit to Summit Springs, already thinking about which weeks to book for the following year. "Marcus wants to try winter next time," Miranda said, swirling her wine. "Apparently there's skiing nearby. Or we could just enjoy the snow. Very romantic," he says. Jessica sipped her own wine, a Pinot Noir that cost $18 a glass and tasted like overpriced regret. "Sounds nice. You're very agreeable tonight. Everything okay?" "Fine. Just tired." "You're always tired." Miranda studied her across the small table. "Seriously, Jess, are you okay? You've been weird for months now, ever since the Daniel thing." "I'm fine," Jessica said again with more force. "Just adjusting." Adjusting to what? To knowing the future, Jessica thought. To living in a world where I know what's coming and can't stop it. To carrying the weight of choices I can't unmake. To being single again, she said instead. "It's harder than I thought." This seemed to satisfy Miranda, as who launched into a familiar speech about self-care and putting yourself first, and how men were ultimately optional accessories to a complete life. Jessica half listened, nodding at appropriate moments, while her mind wandered to late August, to the letter that would arrive, to the moment when Miranda would realize what she'd signed up for. Would Miranda call her, come to her for advice or support, or just someone to vent to? Would Jessica have to sit and listen and pretend to be sympathetic while knowing she'd orchestrated the whole thing? Probably, almost certainly. And she'd have to do it convincingly, had to act surprised and concerned and supportive. Had to be a good friend to someone she deliberately harmed. The wine turned sour in her mouth. August arrived like a held breath. The heat continued, relentless, to turning the days into an endurance test. Jessica's electric bill for July was $240, nearly double what she usually paid. She looked at it and thought about the money she wasn't spending on timeshare maintenance fees, about the special assessment she wouldn't have to scramble to pay. Small comfort, but comfort nonetheless. She knew the timeline now with precision. The foundation problems in Building C had been discovered on June 23rd during routine maintenance. The resort had immediately hired structural engineers to assess the damage. The assessment report had been completed on July 15th and presented to the resort's board of directors on July 22nd. The board had voted on August 1st to levy a special assessment against all owners to cover the necessary repairs. The letters would be mailed on August 12th. Owners would receive them anywhere from August 13th to August 16th, depending on the mail. Miranda would get hers on August 14th, a Friday, which seemed particularly cruel somehow. She'd be at work, would probably check her mail during lunch or after getting home, would open the cream-colored envelope expecting a newsletter or promotional material. Instead, she'd find a letter explaining that her share of emergency repairs was $12,000, due by November 15th. Jessica knew this because she still had her copy of the letter. She'd kept it, filed in a folder with all her other timeshare documents, unable to throw it away even after she'd finally paid the assessment. It was evidence, documentation, proof that it had really happened. Sometimes she'd look at it and remember the sick feeling in her stomach when she'd first read it, so the disbelief and anger and helpless frustration. Now that letter was coming from Miranda instead. The days leading up to August 12th were agony. Jessica couldn't concentrate at work, kept making small errors that Patricia had to catch. She wasn't sleeping, was barely eating, existed in a state of constant low-level nausea that no amount of antacids could touch. "You need to see a doctor," Patricia said on August 10th, finding Jessica staring blankly at her computer screen for the third time that afternoon. "This has gone beyond normal stress." "I'm fine," Jessica said automatically. "You're not fine. You're pale, you're jumpy, you look like you haven't slept in days. What's going on?" "Nothing, just personal stuff. It'll pass." Patricia didn't look convinced, but she let it drop. That was one of the things Jessica appreciated about her. She cared enough to ask, but respected boundaries when they were drawn. August 12th fell on a Monday. Jessica went to work in a daze, moved through her day like a ghost, came home to her too-hot apartment, and sat on her couch in the dark. Somewhere in a facility she'd never see, her letter was being printed. Miranda's name and address appearing on an envelope, the words being assembled that would destroy her illusion of a good investment. The mail was being sorted, loaded onto trucks, sent on its journey to thousands of timeshare owners who thought they understood what they were buying. Jessica had a wild thought. She could call Miranda now, could warn her that something was coming, prepare her for the shock. It wouldn't undo anything, but it might soften the blow. Oh, but what would she say? And how would she know to warn her unless she'd known all along? So she did nothing. Just sat in the dark and waited for Friday to arrive. Thursday night, Jessica didn't sleep at all. She lay in bed watching the ceiling, watching the slow creep of dawn lighten the edges of her curtains, watching the water stain that looked like Australia, or a deformed hand gradually become visible as the sun rose. She called in sick to work. It wasn't entirely a lie. She felt ill, her stomach churning with anxiety and guilt, and the sick anticipation of watching someone else's world crumble. Patricia would understand, or at least pretend to. Dave would be annoyed about whatever deadlines she was missing, but Dave was always annoyed about something. The morning stretched endlessly. Jessica made coffee and didn't drink it, turned on the TV and couldn't focus on it, opened her laptop and closed it again. Every few minutes, she checked her phone, looking for texts from Miranda that hadn't come yet. The mail usually arrived between 2 and 3 p.m. She knew this from years of living in the same apartment, from the patterns you learned by existing in a space long enough. But today felt different, time moving at a different speed, each minute lasting hours. At 1:30, she left her apartment and walked to the grocery store. She didn't need anything, but moving felt better than sitting, and the grocery store had air conditioning. She wandered the aisles without purpose, a zombie in the frozen food section, staring at vegetables she had no intention of buying. Her phone rang at 2:47 p.m. Miranda's name flashed on the screen. See, the photo Jessica had taken 2 years ago. Miranda mid-laugh, wine glass raised, that joy that came from being the center of attention. Jessica's hand shook as she answered. "Jess?" Miranda's voice was strange, tight, like she was trying very hard to sound normal and failing. "Hey, are you home?" "No, I'm at the store." "Why?" "I need to talk to you. Can I come over? Like right now?" Jessica's throat closed. "What's wrong?" I got this letter from Summit Springs, and I don't understand it. I need someone to help me understand it." The grocery store suddenly felt too bright, too loud, too full of people living their normal lives, while Jessica's carefully constructed lie collapsed in real time. "I'll head home now," she managed. "Give me 15 minutes?" "Okay, thank you. Miranda's voice cracked. I'm freaking out a little bit." They hung up. Jessica abandoned her empty cart in the middle of the cereal aisle and walked out of the store. The heat hit her like a physical force, the August sun vicious and unrelenting. She walked to her car, started it, turned the AC on full blast, and sat there for a full minute trying to breathe. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. Miranda knew now. Had the letter, had read it, had to process the implications. And she'd called Jessica, of all people? Had reached out to the person who'd given her the timeshare in the first place, not knowing that person had orchestrated the entire disaster. Jessica drove home with exaggerated care, following every traffic law, paranoid that her distraction would cause an accident. The parking lot of her apartment complex was half empty, most people still at work. Miranda's silver Audi was already there, parked near the entrance, immaculate as always. Jessica parked in her usual spot and sat for a moment, gathering herself. Through her windshield, she could see Miranda sitting in her car, phone to her ear, shoulders hunched. She looked small, diminished, nothing like the confident woman who'd commandeered the timeshare invitation 4 months ago. Jessica got out of her car. The short walk to Miranda's Audi felt like miles. She tapped on the window. Miranda looked up, ended her call, got out of the car. Her eyes were red. Not crying, not quite, but close. She was still wearing her work clothes, a tailored dress in navy blue, heels that probably cost more than Jessica's monthly groceries. But something about her was disheveled, undone in a way that had nothing to do with her clothes. "Thanks for coming home," Miranda said. "I know you were out. I'm sorry to. It's fine. Come on up." They climbed the stairs to Jessica's apartment in silence. Mrs. Patterson's TV was on, the muffled sound of a talk show following them down the hallway. Jessica's hands shook as she unlocked her door, and she hoped Miranda didn't notice. Inside, the apartment was close and warm, despite the window unit running. Jessica had left in a hurry that morning and hadn't tidied up. There were dishes in the sink, a blanket tangled on the couch, yesterday's mail scattered across the table. Normal life detritus, suddenly embarrassing under Miranda's gaze. "Sorry, the place is a mess," Jessica said, moving to clear space on the couch. "I don't care about that." Miranda was clutching her purse like a lifeline. Can I sit?" "Of course. Do you want water? Coffee?" "No, Miranda sat on the edge of the couch, rigid, controlled. "I need you to read something." She pulled an envelope from her purse. Cream-colored, expensive stock, Summit Springs Resort logo in the corner. Jessica recognized it immediately, had held an identical envelope in her own hands in another timeline, had read the words inside with the same disbelief Miranda must have felt. "It came today," Miranda said, "in the mail. I almost didn't open it. I thought it was just promotional stuff, but then I saw it was addressed to owners, and I thought maybe it was about booking or scheduling or something." She held out the envelope. Jessica took it with numb fingers, slid out the letter inside. "A dear Summit Springs owner," it began, exactly as Jessica remembered. "We are writing to inform you of a necessary special assessment to address critical infrastructure repairs at our resort." Jessica read slowly, letting the words sink in even though she already knew them by heart. "The discovery of foundation problems in Building C, the structural engineer's report, the board's decision to levy a special assessment, the amount $12,000 per owner, the deadline November 15th. $12,000, Miranda said. Her voice was eerily calm. They want $12,000 in 3 months, on top of the maintenance fees we're already paying. Jessica set down the letter carefully. "Did you call them to confirm it's real?" "Yes." "I called from the car. They said it's real. Said all owners received letters today." Zoe said the assessment is non-negotiable and legally binding per the contract we signed. Miranda's hands were shaking now. I asked if there were payment plans. They said no. I asked if there were exceptions for new owners. They said no. I asked if we could just give back the timeshare. They said it doesn't work that way. Miranda, $12,000, Jess. Miranda's voice was rising, the calm facade cracking. We just paid $3,000 in maintenance fees. We've owned this thing for 4 months, and it's already cost us $15,000. For 1 week. 1 week a year in a place we went to once. I know it's a lot. It's not just a lot, it's insane. How is this legal? How can they just demand money like this? Jessica had asked the same questions in the other timeline, had gotten the same non-answers. The truth was that it was legal because Miranda, had signed a contract agreeing to it. Buried in the 37 pages of legal jargon was language about special assessments, about the board's authority to levy fees, about the owner's obligation to pay. Did you read the contract when you signed it? Jessica asked, already knowing the answer. We skimmed it. Marcus looked at the financial sections. We asked questions about the maintenance fees and the booking process. But it was so long, and they said it was standard, and we were excited. Miranda trailed off, the implications settling on her. Oh, God, we didn't read it. We just signed it. She put her face in her hands. Her shoulders shook, not crying yet, but fighting it. Jessica sat frozen, watching someone else live through the exact experience she'd had. Me feeling the weight of her own culpability pressing down like a physical force. What am I going to do? Miranda's voice was muffled by her hands. I don't have $12,000 just sitting around. I have savings, but that's for important things. Emergencies. Not this. This is an emergency. This is a scam. Miranda's head snapped up, her face flushed. This whole thing is a scam. The presentation and the contract, the whole operation. They got us excited, pressured us to sign, and now they're hitting us with bills we can't afford. It's predatory. She stopped, breathing hard. I was so stupid. You're not stupid. I am. I fell for it. I listened to their pitch and I believed them and I signed a contract without reading it and now I'm stuck with this albatross around my neck. $12,000? What if something else breaks? What if there's another assessment? The letter says this is just for Building C. There are 5 buildings at that resort. What if the others have problems too? These were exactly the right questions. Exactly the spiral Jessica had gone down in the other timeline. The special assessment for Building C had been followed 18 months later by a smaller assessment for roof repairs. After that, Jessica had stopped paying attention, had just grimly paid whatever bills arrived. The timeshare had become a permanent drain, a reminder of her own poor judgment. And she'd given it to Miranda. I'm so sorry, Jessica said, and meant it more than Miranda could possibly know. It's not your fault. You didn't know. Miranda laughed, harsh and bitter. You gave me the invitation because you didn't want it. You probably knew it was too good to be true. And I took it anyway because I'm an idiot who can't turn down a free vacation. You're not an idiot. Then what am I? What do you call someone who signs a contract without reading it? Who gets scammed by the oldest trick in the book? Human, Jessica thought. Fallible, normal. You call them human. You call them unlucky, she said instead. This isn't your fault, Miranda. They're professionals. This is what they do. They've perfected the art of making it look reasonable, making people feel like they're getting a deal. You're not the first person to sign a timeshare contract and regret it. That doesn't make me feel better. I know. They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the world continued. Cars passing, birds calling, the distant sound of someone's music. No, normal Friday afternoon sounds. Life going on while Miranda's world restructured itself around this new reality. What did Marcus say? Jessica asked. Miranda's expression darkened. We fought. He's furious. Saying I pressured him into signing that he had reservations, but I was so excited he went along with it, which is bullshit. He ran the numbers. He said it made financial sense. But now he's acting like this is all my fault. It's not your fault. You made the decision together. Try telling him that. Miranda pulled out her phone, scrolled through what looked like a long text conversation. He's talking to a lawyer, trying to see if there's any way out of the contract. But I already know what they're going to say. We signed it. We're stuck. Jessica had consulted a lawyer, too, in the other timeline. had paid $300 for a consultation that ended with the attorney explaining that timeshare contracts were notoriously difficult to break, that her best option was to try to sell it. Good luck finding a buyer, or just accept the loss and keep paying the fees. She'd kept paying the fees. It had seemed like the only option. "I'm sorry," Jessica said again uselessly. Miranda looked at her, and something in her expression shifted. "Why did you give it to me?" "Really?" Jessica's heart stopped. "What do you mean?" "The invitation. You got it, you signed up for it, then you just gave it away. Why? You never do stuff like that. You're not spontaneous with gifts." "I told you. I didn't want it. You seemed interested." "But you could have just thrown it away. Could have ignored it, let the reservation lapse. Instead, you made a point of calling them, changing the names, making sure I could use it." Miranda's eyes narrowed. "Why?" The question hung between them, sharp and dangerous. Jessica felt the weight of the truth pressing against her teeth, demanding to be spoken. She could confess right now, could explain about the rebirth, about knowing what would happen, about choosing to save herself at Miranda's expense. The truth would destroy whatever was left of their friendship. But maybe that friendship was already a lie, built on manipulation and guilt, and the fundamental imbalance of Jessica knowing things Miranda didn't. "I thought you'd enjoy it," Jessica said, and hated herself for the cowardice. "I thought it would be a nice gift." "A nice gift?" Miranda's voice was flat. "A nice gift that's going to cost me $12,000. I didn't know about the assessment. Didn't you?" The question was sharp, accusatory. Jessica felt her pulse spike. "How would I know? I didn't buy it. I didn't even go to the full presentation." "But you must have researched it, must have looked into Summit Springs before deciding to give away a free vacation." "What did you find?" "Nothing. In the original timeline, Jessica had done exactly zero research before signing the contract, had just believed the salesman's pitch and made a choice she'd immediately regretted. But Miranda didn't know that. Miranda was looking at her with suspicion now, with the dawning realization that something didn't add up. "I didn't research it," Jessica said. "I just thought you'd like a free trip. That's all?" "That's all," Miranda repeated. She stood up abruptly, grabbing her purse. "I should go. Marcus is waiting for me. We have to figure out what to do." "Miranda, thank you for letting me talk. I'm sorry for dumping this on you." Her voice was professional now, distant, the tone she used with colleagues she didn't particularly like. "I'll let you know what the lawyer says." She walked to the door. Jessica followed, wanting to say something that would fix this, knowing nothing could. "I really am sorry," Jessica said. Miranda paused in the doorway, looked back. "Are you?" Then she left, her heels clicking down the hallway, the sound fading until Jessica heard the distant ding of the elevator. Jessica closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking. Her whole body was shaking. Miranda suspected something. Maybe not the whole truth, that would be impossible to guess, but something. She'd seen the holes in Jessica's story, the inconsistencies. And even if she couldn't articulate exactly what was wrong, she knew something was. The friendship was over. Jessica understood that now. Even if Miranda never figured out the truth, the timeshare would always stand between them. Miranda would associate Jessica with this mistake, this regret, this financial burden. Every time she paid the maintenance fees or received another assessment, she'd remember that Jessica had given her the invitation. And maybe she'd start to wonder why. Jessica walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of water with shaking hands, set it down without drinking it, walked to the window and looked out at the parking lot, where Miranda's Audi was pulling away, the exhaust visible in the heat-shimmered air. She'd saved herself. She'd avoided the financial ruin that had plagued her in the original timeline. Her credit score was intact, her savings untouched, her relationship with her parents unmarred by having to borrow money for a stupid mistake. She'd won. So why did she feel like she'd lost everything? The next few weeks passed in a fog. Jessica went to work, came home, existed in a state of numb detachment. Miranda didn't call, didn't text, didn't reach out. Jessica checked her Instagram occasionally and saw that she'd stopped posting. No updates about the timeshare, no photos of her and Marcus, just silence where there had once been constant activity. She'd broken Miranda in some fundamental way. The assessment wasn't just a financial burden. It was a crack in Miranda's self-image as someone who was smart, savvy, impossible to scam. Miranda had built her identity on being better than everyone else, on seeing angles others missed, on never being the sucker. And Jessica had made her the sucker. At work, Patricia noticed something was wrong, but had stopped asking about it. Instead, she brought coffee, left sticky notes with encouraging messages, respected Jessica's silence while making it clear she was available if needed. It was kindness without expectation, and it made Jessica want to cry. In early September, Jessica saw on LinkedIn that Miranda had changed jobs. She'd left the investment firm where she'd worked for 5 years and taken a position at a competitor. The announcement was brief, professional, no explanation given. But Jessica understood. Miranda was running, now trying to outpace the shame and regret by changing everything she could control. It wouldn't work. Jessica knew that from experience. You couldn't outrun your mistakes. They followed you, patient and relentless, waiting for quiet moments to remind you of what you'd done. One evening in late September, Jessica found herself digging through her files, looking for the original special assessment letter she'd received in the other timeline. She'd kept it in a folder with all her timeshare documents, unable to throw it away even after everything was resolved. It was evidence, proof that it had really happened. She found the folder at the bottom of a desk drawer, beneath old tax returns and expired warranties. But when she opened it, the folder was empty. No letter, no contract, no documentation. Because in this timeline, she'd never signed the contract, had never received the assessment, had never owned the timeshare at all. The realization hit her like a physical blow. The letter existed only in her memory, in a timeline that no longer existed except in her head. There was no proof of what had happened, what she'd avoided, what she'd known, just her own recollection of events that, from the perspective of this timeline, had never occurred. She was carrying memories of a life she hadn't lived, consequences she hadn't faced, choices she hadn't made. And she'd used those memories to manipulate events, to shift the burden from herself to someone else. She'd thought she was being smart, strategic, protecting herself from a future she'd already lived through. But looking at the empty folder, at the absence of evidence, she understood what she'd really done. She'd used knowledge that didn't belong to her, knowledge she'd somehow retained from another timeline, another version of reality, to harm someone else. She'd taken her second chance and used it not just to avoid her own mistakes, but to ensure someone else made them instead. That wasn't wisdom. That wasn't strategic thinking. That was evil. The thought arrived fully formed, stark, and undeniable. Jessica sat at her desk, holding the empty folder, feeling the weight of it settle in her chest. She'd done an evil thing, had justified it with logic and reasoning and practical considerations, but at its core, what she'd done was evil. She'd known Miranda would be hurt, had known the assessment was coming, had known exactly how devastating it would be, and she'd done it anyway. She had set everything in motion and watched it unfold with the detachment of someone observing an experiment. Her phone rang, startling her out of her thoughts. Unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Miss Monroe, this is Richard Peterson from Summit Springs Resort." Rich. The salesman. Jessica hadn't heard his voice in months, but she recognized it immediately. Smooth, practiced, slightly too friendly. "I wanted to reach out personally to let you know about an exciting opportunity for past guests. We're offering a limited time package. I'm not interested. I completely understand, but if I could just take a moment of your time." "I know about the special assessment," Jessica said. The words came out harsh, accusatory. "I know about Building C's foundation problems. I know what you did to the people who bought in." There was a pause. "I'm not sure what you're referring to. Our infrastructure maintenance is a disaster that you hid from buyers, that you're now making them pay for. $12,000 per owner." Jessica's voice was rising. "You sold them a lie. You told them it was an investment, that they were getting value, and now you're bleeding them dry." Another pause, longer this time. "Miss Monroe, I understand you may have heard concerns from other owners, but I assure you—" "Stop. Just stop." Jessica closed her eyes. "I don't want to hear your pitch. I don't want to hear your explanations. I just want you to know that I know what you are." "And what's that?" "A predator. Someone who profits from other people's trust." She hung up before he could respond. Her hands were shaking again. She set down the phone and stared at it, at her own reflection in the dark screen. A predator who profits from other people's trust. The description fit Rich Peterson perfectly. But didn't it also fit her? She'd used Miranda's trust, had manipulated their friendship to ensure Miranda would take the timeshare, had profited, if you could call avoiding financial ruin profit, from Miranda's ignorance. They were the same, she and Rich. Different methods, maybe, but the same fundamental willingness to hurt others for personal gain. The thought made her sick. That night, Jessica dreamed she was back in the Summit Springs conference room, but this time, she was the one giving the presentation, standing at the front of the room with a pointer and a smile, explaining to Miranda why the timeshare was such a great opportunity. And Miranda was listening, nodding, believing every word. The dream shifted. Now Jessica was signing the contract, watching the pen move across the page, unable to stop even though she knew what would happen next. The ink was red instead of blue, and it kept flowing, spreading across the page like blood, staining everything it touched. She woke up gasping, sheets tangled around her legs, the apartment dark and close despite the window unit running. 3:47 a.m., according to her phone. Too late to be awake, too early to start the day. She lay in the darkness, listening to Mrs. Patterson's television through the wall, trying to slow her racing heart. At 4:30, she gave up on sleep and made coffee. Sat at her kitchen table watching the sky lighten through the window, thinking about choices and consequences and the weight of knowledge. She'd been given an impossible gift, the chance to relive her life with full awareness of what was coming, and she'd used it to save herself by destroying someone else. There was no way to reconcile that with being a good person. No rationalization that would make it okay. The question was, what did she do now? She couldn't undo what she'd done. Couldn't go back and warn Miranda. Couldn't prevent the assessment. The timeline had already shifted. Reality had already reformed itself around her choices. Miranda owned the timeshare, had received the letter, was dealing with the consequences. But maybe Jessica could help with those consequences. She had savings. Not as much as Miranda, but some. She could offer to help pay the assessment, could frame it as guilt over having given Miranda the invitation in the first place. It wouldn't fix everything, but it might ease the burden. The thought had barely formed when she recognized it for what it was. Another attempt to feel better without actually making things right. Throwing money at the problem wouldn't change what she'd done, wouldn't address the fundamental violation of using Miranda as a shield against consequences Jessica had wanted to avoid. No. If she was going to make this right, if that was even possible, she had to tell the truth. The realization settled over her like weight, like water, like inevitable conclusion. She had to tell Miranda everything about the rebirth, about the original timeline, about knowing what would happen and choosing to let it happen to Miranda instead. She had to confess the whole ugly truth and accept whatever consequences came. Miranda probably wouldn't believe her. You would think Jessica had lost her mind, was having some kind of breakdown, but at least she'd know that something was wrong, that Jessica's actions hadn't been random or thoughtless, but deliberate and calculated. At least she'd know who Jessica really was. Jessica finished her coffee and watched the sunrise, thinking about what she would say and how she would say it. The truth was impossible, but silence was no longer sustainable. She'd have to find words for the impossible, and hope that somewhere in the explanation, Miranda would understand. Or wouldn't. Either way, the truth had to be told. She picked up her phone and typed, "Can we talk? There's something I need to tell you." She stared at the message for a long time before sending it. The response came 3 hours later. "I'm listening." They met at the same coffee shop where they'd had drinks months ago, back when Miranda was excited about the timeshare and Jessica was carrying the weight of knowing what would happen. The place looked different in October morning light, less sophisticated, more tired. The exposed brick needed repointing. The reclaimed wood showed water damage. The prices still assumed you made more money than you did. Miranda was already there when Jessica arrived, sitting at a small table in the back corner. She looked different, too. Thinner, harder somehow, like the last few months had worn away something soft. She was drinking black coffee from a to-go cup, had probably brought it from somewhere else rather than pay the cafe's prices. "Hi," Jessica said, pulling out the chair across from her. "Hi." Miranda's voice was neutral, carefully blank. "You said you needed to talk." "I do, but first, how are you? With everything?" Miranda's smile was sharp. "You mean the $12,000 surprise? I'm managing. Marcus and I broke up, if you're wondering. Turns out financial stress is great for exposing the cracks in a relationship. I'm sorry. Are you? The same question from before, still sharp, still searching. I've been thinking about that a lot lately, about why you gave me that invitation, about whether you knew. I knew, Jessica said. Miranda went very still. What? I knew about the special assessment, about the foundation problems, about what would happen if you signed the contract. The words came easier than Jessica expected, like lancing a wound. I knew all of it. And I gave you the invitation anyway. How could you know? The assessment wasn't announced until August. We signed in February. Because I've lived this before. Jessica took a breath. I know how this sounds. I know you're not going to believe me, but I need to tell you anyway because you deserve to know the truth. She told her. All of it. The original timeline where she'd signed the contract, received the assessment, spent years paying for a mistake she couldn't undo. Waking up that Monday in February, back before it had happened, with all her memories intact. The decision to give the invitation to Miranda instead. Watching it all unfold exactly as she'd known it would. Miranda listened without interrupting, her expression unreadable. When Jessica finished, silence stretched between them. They're broken only by the ambient noise of the cafe, the hiss of the espresso machine, the murmur of conversation, someone's phone ringing. You're telling me, Miranda said slowly, that you traveled back in time. I don't know what happened. I just woke up and it was February again, and I knew everything that was going to happen. And you used that knowledge to scam me. Yes, you orchestrated the whole thing. Gave me the invitation knowing I'd sign, knowing about the assessment, knowing it would cost me thousands of dollars. Yes, Miranda laughed, but there was no humor in it. This is insane. You understand that, right? You're describing something impossible. I know. So, either you're lying to cover up something else, or you've had some kind of psychotic break. Miranda leaned forward. Which is it, Jess? Are you lying? Or are you crazy? Neither. I'm telling you the truth. The truth, Miranda shook her head. The truth is that you're sitting here telling me you traveled through time like some kind of science fiction movie. The truth is that you expect me to believe that you lived through months of events that never happened, then woke up in the past with all your memories intact. That's not truth, Jessica. That's delusion. I know how it sounds. Do you? Do you really? Miranda's voice was rising now, attracting glances from other customers. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're either having a mental health crisis or you're making up an elaborate lie to justify doing something horrible to me. Either way, I can't. She stopped, breathing hard. Why are you telling me this? Because you deserve to know. I deserved to know before I signed the contract. I deserved a warning, a heads up, anything that would have prevented me from making the biggest financial mistake of my life. Miranda's hands were shaking. Instead, you set me up. You used our friendship to manipulate me into taking something you knew would destroy me. And now you're telling me some insane story about time travel expecting what? Forgiveness? Understanding? I don't expect anything. I just needed you to know the truth. The truth, Miranda repeated. She stood up, gathering her purse. You want to know what I think the truth is? I think you researched Summit Springs before giving me that invitation. I think you found out about the foundation problems, maybe from owner forums, maybe from news articles. I don't know. And instead of warning me, you decided to use me as a guinea pig. Or maybe you were just jealous of my job, my life, my relationship with Marcus. So you found a way to hurt me while making it look like a gift. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? Explain it to me in a way that makes sense. Because time travel doesn't make sense. Your story doesn't make sense. Nothing about this makes sense except that you hurt me deliberately, and now you're trying to justify it with fairy tales. Jessica had known this would happen, had known Miranda wouldn't believe her, but hearing it laid out, hearing how it sounded from the outside, made her realize how impossible the truth really was. I can prove it, she heard herself say. How? I know things that haven't happened yet. Oh, things I couldn't possibly know unless I'd lived through them before. Miranda sat back down slowly. Like what? Jessica thought fast, sorting through her memories of the next few months. What had happened that was specific enough to be impressive, unlikely enough to be unpredictable? Your company, she said, the one you just started at. They're going to announce a merger in December with Caldwell Strategic. The deal will fall through in January because of regulatory issues, but they'll announce it in December. Miranda's expression didn't change. That's not exactly specific. Companies announce mergers all the time. The announcement will come on December 12th, a Thursday. Your CEO will send an all-hands email at 9:47 a.m. The subject line will be an exciting new chapter. The stock price will spike by 23% before market close. Now Miranda looked uncertain. How do you know that? Because you told me about it. In the original timeline, you were excited about the merger, thought it would mean promotions and bonuses. Then when it fell through, you were devastated. I've never told you anything about my new company. I've barely been there a month. You haven't told me yet, but you will. You told me in December, right after the announcement. Miranda stared at her. This is insane. I know. You can't know that. You can't know any of it. But I do. Jessica leaned forward. I know that Mrs. Patterson in my building is going to die in November. Heart attack, very sudden. I know that Dave from Regulatory is going to quit in January to start his own consulting firm. I know that Daniel, my ex, is going to get engaged in March to the girl from his office. I know all of this because I lived through it before. Or you're making educated guesses based on patterns and probability. On December 12th at 9:47 a.m., check your email. When you see the merger announcement, you'll know I was telling the truth. Miranda stood up again, but this time her movements were less certain, more hesitant. I don't know what game you're playing, but I want no part of it. Whether you're crazy or cruel or both, I don't care anymore. We're done, Jessica. Whatever friendship we had, it's over. I understand. Do you? Do you understand that you've destroyed the last few months of my life? That I wake up every day sick about the timeshare, about the money, about how stupid I was? That I ended a relationship and changed jobs trying to outrun the shame of being scammed? Miranda's voice cracked. You did that. Whether it was through time travel or research or just pure malice, you did it. And I will never forgive you for it. She left, walked out of the cafe without looking back, leaving Jessica sitting alone at the small table with cold coffee and the weight of truth no one could believe. Jessica sat there for a long time after Miranda left. The cafe filled up with the lunch crowd, people ordering complicated sandwiches and $14 salads, chattering about work and plans and the mundane details of lives untouched by impossible knowledge. She'd told the truth. It hadn't helped. Maybe nothing could help at this point. The damage was done, the friendship destroyed, the betrayal complete. But at least Miranda knew now, even if she didn't believe it. At least Jessica had stopped carrying the lie. Her phone buzzed. A text from Patricia. You coming back to the office? Dave is asking about the ventilator manual. Jessica typed back, on my way. She left money on the table for coffee she hadn't ordered and walked out into October sunshine. The world continued its relentless forward march, indifferent to personal catastrophes and broken friendships and the impossible weight of living the same life twice. At work, she threw herself into the ventilator manual with desperate focus, translated engineering specifications into clear language, created diagrams and warnings and step-by-step instructions, lost herself in the precision of it, in the comfort of problems that had definite solutions. Patricia stopped by her desk around 3 p.m. with coffee and concern. You okay? You've been staring at that screen for 3 hours straight. Just focused. Focused like productive or focused like avoiding something? Jessica managed a smile. Little of both. Patricia set down the coffee, a simple drip coffee, not the expensive artisanal nonsense from the cafe, and perched on the edge of Jessica's desk. I'm not going to pry, but if you need to talk, or if you need a distraction, or if you just need someone to sit with you while you stare at specifications, I'm here. The kindness was almost unbearable. Jessica felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back. Thank you, she managed. That's what friends do, Patricia said simply. Then, standing. Also, Dave wants the manual by Friday. Just FYI. I'll have it done by Thursday. Overachiever. Patricia smiled and left, her cardigan swishing, coffee mug leaving a faint trail of steam. Jessica turned back to her computer and worked until the words blurred together. Worked until her eyes ached and her shoulders cramped and her mind finally, mercifully, went quiet. The weeks leading up to December 12th passed in a kind of suspended animation. Jessica existed, functioned, went through the motions of her life, but everything felt distant and unreal. She was a ghost, haunting her own existence, waiting for the one piece of evidence that might prove she wasn't crazy. November arrived with the first real cold snap. Mrs. Patterson died on the 17th, exactly as Jessica had predicted. The ambulance came in the early morning. Oh, lights flashing, but no siren because there was no rush anymore. Jessica watched from her window as they carried out the stretcher, the shape under the sheets small and final. She'd known it was coming, had even considered warning someone, calling 911 preemptively, suggesting Mrs. Patterson get her heart checked. But who would have believed her, and how would she explain knowing? So she'd done nothing, and Mrs. Patterson died on schedule, and Jessica added another weight to the burden she carried. The funeral was small. Jessica went, stood in the back of the church, listened to Mrs. Patterson's daughter talk about a woman Jessica had barely known, despite living next door to her for 3 years. After, she signed the guest book out of obligation and left before anyone could ask how she knew the deceased. That night, she lay in bed listening to the silence where Mrs. Patterson's television used to be. The absence was profound, unsettling. She'd complained about that television sound for years, had been annoyed by its constant drone. Now she'd give anything to hear it again. At work, Dave gave his notice the first week of December, announced it in an all-hands meeting, looking nervous and excited in equal measure. He was starting a consulting firm, he explained, focusing on regulatory compliance for medical device startups. He'd be leaving end of month. Patricia leaned over to Jessica during the meeting and whispered, "Did you know about this?" "No," Jessica lied. "Weird. He's been acting strange for weeks. I wonder what prompted it." Jessica wondered too. In the original timeline, she'd been surprised by Dave's announcement, had never seen it coming. But this time, knowing it was coming, she'd watched for signs. Had noticed Dave's distraction, his increased private phone calls, the way he'd started delegating tasks he normally hoarded. Had her knowledge changed anything? Or had Dave always been planning this and Jessica had simply been too self-absorbed to notice the first time? The question haunted her. How much of what she remembered was objective truth, and how much was filtered through her own limited perspective? She'd assumed her memories were complete, accurate, reliable, but memories were always subjective, always incomplete. What if she'd misremembered crucial details? What if the future she was predicting was based on faulty recollection? December 12th fell on a Thursday, exactly as she'd told Miranda. Jessica woke at 6:30 to her alarm, got ready for work with mechanical precision, drove through the cold morning to MedEquip Solutions. The parking lot was its usual Thursday occupancy, maybe slightly more full because of the approaching holidays. She sat at her desk, opened her email, watched the unread count climb as messages loaded. Nothing unusual, just the normal deluge of newsletters and notifications and mundane work correspondence. At 9:47, she refreshed her email. Nothing. 9:48. Still nothing. At 9:51, 3 new messages appeared. One from HR about updated benefits enrollment. One from the IT department about scheduled maintenance. One from... Her heart stopped. An email from Miranda. Sent 8 minutes ago at 9:43. Subject: You were right. Jessica's hand shook as she opened it. I don't know how you knew. I don't know what to think. But at 9:47 this morning, my CEO sent an all-hands email announcing a merger with Caldwell Strategic. The subject line was, "An exciting new chapter. The stock is up 21% as of this writing. You knew." You knew? How is that possible? I still think you're hiding something. I still think there's an explanation that doesn't involve time travel. But I can't figure out what it is. What are you? Jessica read the message 3 times. Then she opened a new reply and stared at the blank screen, cursor blinking, waiting for words that wouldn't come. What was she? A person who'd been given impossible knowledge and used it to save herself at someone else's expense. A friend who'd betrayed trust in the service of self-preservation. A woman carrying memories of a life she'd lived and unmade and couldn't escape. She was all of these things and none of them. Why was ordinary and impossible in equal measure? After a long moment, she typed, "Can we talk? In person?" The reply came quickly. "Tomorrow, 6 p.m. That coffee shop." Jessica closed her email and sat very still, feeling the weight of tomorrow pressing down like weather. Miranda believed her now, or was at least open to believing, but belief didn't erase what had happened, didn't undo the timeshare or the assessment or the months of damage. It just meant they could both see the truth clearly now. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Jessica worked, attended meetings, responded to emails, all while carrying the knowledge that everything was about to shift again, that tomorrow she'd have to face Miranda with proof of her claims, and together they'd have to figure out what came next. That evening, she drove home through early darkness. December sun setting before 5 p.m. The parking lot of her apartment complex looked different without Mrs. Patterson's Lincoln. Someone new had moved into the apartment. Jessica had heard them moving furniture over the weekend, but she didn't know anything about them yet. She climbed the stairs to her apartment, unlocked the door, stepped into space that felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. The vanilla air freshener had run out weeks ago, and she hadn't replaced it. Now the apartment just smelled like itself. Old carpet, dust, the faint mustiness of a building from 1972. She made dinner, pasta from a box, sauce from a jar, and ate it without tasting it. Tried to watch TV and couldn't focus. Tried to read and gave up after 3 pages. Finally, she just sat on her couch in the dark, waiting for tomorrow to arrive. The coffee shop at 6 p.m. on a Friday was quieter than it had been on Thursday morning. The after-work crowd had come and gone, leaving only a few stragglers hunched over laptops or books. Jessica arrived first, bought an actual coffee this time, sat at the same table in the back corner. Miranda arrived 10 minutes late, looking harried and tired. She'd come straight from work. Jessica could tell by the professional clothes, the slight dishevelment that came from a long day. She bought nothing from the counter, just walked straight to the table and sat down. "Okay," she said without preamble. "I've been thinking about this for 24 hours straight. I've considered every possible explanation. Insider information, corporate espionage, elaborate prank, psychic powers, everything. And I keep coming back to the same conclusion. I don't have a fucking clue how you knew about the merger." "Because I lived through it before," Jessica said. "Right. Time travel." Miranda's voice dripped skepticism, but there was something else there too. Uncertainty. "Which is impossible." "I know. But you knew about the merger. You knew the exact time, the subject line, everything." "I did." Miranda leaned back in her chair. "So what am I supposed to do with that? How am I supposed to process that one of my friends has lived through the future and use that knowledge to screw me over?" "You can't," Jessica said. "I don't know how to process it either. I've been living with it for months, and I still don't understand it." "Why me?" The question was quiet, almost lost in the ambient noise. If you knew what would happen, why not just throw away the invitation? Why involve me at all? This was the question Jessica had been dreading and expecting in equal measure, the one that got to the heart of everything. "Because I was scared," she said, "because I remembered what the timeshare did to me, financially, emotionally, all of it. And when I woke up back in February, all I could think about was avoiding it, making sure it didn't happen to me again." "So you made it happen to me instead?" "Yes." "You used our friendship as a weapon?" "Yes." "And you expect me to what? Forgive you because you had a good reason?" "No," Jessica said. "I don't expect forgiveness. I just want you to understand what happened. Why it happened." Miranda was silent for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was different. Not angry, not hurt, just tired. "Mia, the worst part is that I get it," she said. "I understand the logic. If I'd been in your position, if I'd known what was coming, I probably would have done the same thing. Self-preservation is powerful, and you didn't force me to sign the contract. I made that choice myself. But you wouldn't have been in that position if I hadn't given you the invitation." "True." Miranda looked at her hands, at the table, anywhere but Jessica's face. "So where does that leave us?" Jessica had thought about this question constantly since their last meeting, had turned it over in her mind from every angle, looking for an answer that would make things right. There wasn't one. "I can't give you back the time you've lost," she said, "or the money, or the peace of mind. I can't undo what I did, but I can help with the assessment." "I have savings." "I don't want your money," Miranda cut in. "I don't need it. Marcus and I had a trust fund from my grandmother. We're using that to pay the assessment. The money's not the issue." "Then what is?" "Trust." Miranda finally looked up, met Jessica's eyes. "You're my friend. Or you were. I trusted you, and you took that trust and used it to hurt me. That's what I can't get past. Not the timeshare, not the money, not even the whole impossible time travel thing. It's that you knew you were hurting me and you did it anyway. The words landed like blows. Jessica absorbed them, felt their truth, couldn't dispute any of it. "You're right," she said. "Everything you're saying is right. I knew, and I did it anyway, and I have to live with that." "So do I," Miranda said. "That's the part you don't seem to get. This isn't just your burden to carry. I'm the one stuck with the timeshare. I'm the one who has to explain to my family why I signed a stupid contract. I'm the one who wakes up every morning regretting it. You gave me that weight, and I can't put it down." Jessica had no response to that. What could she say? Sorry seemed inadequate. Any explanation would sound like an excuse. So she just sat in the silence, letting Miranda's words hang between them. "I need you to understand something," Miranda continued. "I believe you about the time travel, about knowing the future, all of it. I believe you because there's no other explanation that makes sense. But believing you doesn't mean I forgive you. It doesn't mean we're okay. It just means I understand what happened." "I know." "Do you? Because you keep acting like if you just explain enough, if you give me all the facts, somehow that will make it better. But it doesn't. Understanding why you hurt me doesn't make me hurt less." She was right. Of course she was right. Jessica had been so focused on the confession, on the truth-telling, that she'd lost sight of the fundamental fact. Knowledge didn't equal healing. "So what do we do now?" Jessica asked. Miranda considered this. "I don't know. Part of me wants to never see you again, to just cut you out of my life and move on. But another part of me is curious, I guess. You've lived through the next few months. You know what's coming. And as angry as I am, I can't help wondering if that knowledge could be useful. I'm not going to tell you the future." "Why not? You already changed it by warning me about the merger. Why not keep going? Tell me what to avoid, what to pursue, how to make the best choices." "Because it doesn't work that way," Jessica said. "Every change I make ripples outward. I've already shifted the timeline in ways I can't predict. The future I remember might not be the future that's coming anymore. But you knew about Mrs. Patterson. You knew about Dave. You knew about the merger. For now. But the further we get from February, the less certain I am about anything. The timeline is diverging. Soon my memories won't match reality anymore, and then I'll be as lost as everyone else." Miranda absorbed this. "When do you think that happens? When does your knowledge become worthless?" "I don't know. Maybe it already has. Maybe everything I remember is already wrong because I changed the initial conditions. Or maybe you still have time to help people. To warn them about things that are coming. And maybe I've already done enough damage." They sat in silence for a while. The coffee shop continued around them, the hiss of steam, the clatter of cups, the ordinary sounds of ordinary lives. Jessica thought about all the futures she'd seen and unseen, lived and unlived, about the weight of knowledge and the burden of choice, and the impossible task of living twice. "I'm going to need time," Miranda said eventually, "to process all of this, to figure out what I feel and what I want, but I don't want to cut you out completely, not yet anyway, okay? And I need you to promise me something." "What?" "No more manipulation, no more using your knowledge to steer my life. If we're going to have any kind of relationship going forward, it has to be honest, completely honest. Oh, even when the truth is impossible." "I promise," Jessica said, and meant it. Miranda stood, gathering her things. "The assessment is due in January. I'm going to pay it, move on, try to sell the timeshare or rent it, or just live with it. And you're going to have to live with knowing what you did. That's the deal." "I can live with that." "Good." Miranda paused at the edge of the table. "For what it's worth, I don't think you're evil. I think you're human, flawed and scared and trying to survive. But that doesn't mean what you did was okay." "I know." Miranda left. Jessica sat alone in the coffee shop until they started putting chairs up on tables, a silent signal that closing time was approaching. Then she paid, left, drove home through December darkness. In her apartment, she stood at the window and looked out at the parking lot. The space where Mrs. Patterson's Lincoln used to be was empty now. Just concrete and shadows and the absence of something that had been there so long it seemed permanent. Everything changed. Everything ended. Even timelines and friendships, and the illusion of control over your own life. You made choices, and lived with consequences, and carried weights you never asked for. Jessica had been given the impossible gift of living twice, and she'd used it to save herself at someone else's expense. She'd have to carry that weight forever, in this timeline and any other that might exist beyond it. The knowledge sat in her chest like a stone, heavy and permanent and entirely earned. Outside, snow began to fall, the first snow of the season, light and tentative. It wouldn't stick. December in this city was too warm, too uncertain. But for now, the flakes drifted down through the streetlight glow, each one unique and temporary and doomed to melt the moment it touched the ground. Jessica watched them fall and thought about choices and consequences and the price of knowing too much. She thought about Miranda, about Mrs. Patterson, about all the futures she'd seen and the one she was living now. Then she closed the curtains and went to bed, ready to face tomorrow with no more knowledge than anyone else about what it might bring.